What is going on, everybody? Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. I wish I had more jovial and happy reason behind the podcast today, but look, man, we got to pay respects. That's just how it goes when you're a boxing fan, and we're trying to kind of chronicle some of the history stuff that's going on in the sport. So, my boy Aris Pina is here with me today. We're just going to go over the careers of George Foreman and Ras-I Alujah Bramble, aka Livingstone Bramble. Unfortunately, just back to back, we lost two great fighters from especially, that just happened to fight in a time where we could remember them. So, man, we're starting to feel old. It's been a weird week. Aris, how are you holding up, dude?
Probably as well as everyone else is. I was a boxing fan and big fans of both fighters, so not good at all, I guess, in that sense, right? It's just one of those ones that kind of makes you reel and hit, and you're just like, fuck, because it happened so suddenly back to back. And also, for that mentioned, the famed writer and author Colin Hart was another one who passed away
That's a good point.
at,
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for the reminder.
at the same weekend.
Yeah.
But
Which is crazy because I was literally I think it was articles about Lloyd Hunnigan, like maybe
mhm,
2 weeks ago or something like that. I was downloading a whole bunch of them and he was, his name was plastered on a bunch of them. So that was kind of just like, what? That's really strange synchronicity that happened. But
such is
anyway,
life sometimes.
yeah.
But the one, particularly with Bramble and George Foreman. It was one of those type of hits that I guess I was trying to think about it in the terms of like when's the last time something's happened so like suddenly back to back like that with guys passing and maybe I'm missing someone, but I had to go back to 2009, when that crazy awful summer
The
when Alexis Arguello.
summer of fucking pain.
Yeah.
Shit. And that was it was like a few weeks or something too, man. It was like,
Oh yeah, I
God,
mean it was all within a
just
couple of months of
terrible.
each other. Yeah, it was really, really awful with Alexis
Arguello, Gotti,
Arguello,
and then Vernon
Burning
Forrest.
Forest. Sure. And so with a guy like George Foreman, Foreman was one of those guys that we always thought he'd kind of live forever because we just grew up with him, like you said. Foreman was more so, even more than just a boxer. Foreman was a pop culture icon of the 90s. And just everywhere you can think about, he was around. Besides his big comeback, he had the grill, which I guess we'll go into how he acquired that at one point. He even had he even had a sitcom show, remember? That like sometimes
I was about to
yeah.
bring that up if you
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah. Nobody
That a lot
remembers
of
that shit.
no one does. 'Cause I mean, it was very
Yeah,
short-lived,
it
like
was
a lot
very
of early
short
90s,
lived.
and probably for the best, but like a lot of early 90s sitcoms. What was it called? Was it called By George or something?
It was either George it was something George. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was, but I mean, he was pretty ubiquitous at that point.
sure. And the video game appearances, the various other commercials he would make appearances for. I think he was there for Minor Key and Inventa something. But George was everywhere. You know what I mean? He was everywhere you could think about. And also for his HBO announcing, whether you loved him or hated him or were kind of in between. I absolutely loved him because anytime you had a thing with George, you just never knew what you were going to get out of him. Seriously, like he was very insightful in a lot of times, but then again, sometimes he would just be saying the most random shit that you would just be like, wait, what? But that's what made George George, and you had to love him for that, you know? It was just whatever came to his mind, he was gonna say. And but everything at the end of it, you can just feel he was genuine, you know? He was a guy that made an absolute true comeback in his life. And that's the most incredible part about it, is that he came from a guy that in his first career, which we'll get into in like a couple of seconds, but from his first career, just looking about as sullen and um in the American public almost as like vilified as Sonny Liston. Not to that degree because Foreman there was levels to it, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I think the public was just as scared as Foreman, and for good reason, you know. I mean, not only was the way he just destroyed people in the ring, but it was just like his demeanor outside of it. He wasn't very friendly as all and sullen and this and that, and just a different guy that made you just be like, like a monster movie come to life. But then to reinvent himself when he comes back in 1987 and the way he did and jovial and happy and fat and now bald and everyone wants to love him and he's going around eating cheeseburgers and kissing babies and just making appearances and everything is just everything comes up George is just a remarkable turnaround. But Yeah, it was absolutely tragic. I mean, when you told me, I think it was on Friday it happened, right? Because Saturday is when Bramble passed away. Um, when you hit me on Friday and let me know, I was floored because I guess he's gone quiet on Twitter as of lately. I haven't really paid attention that much because I'm not on it that often. But I look back on when the last time he tweeted, and I guess was back in 2024. But he used to be really active on it, and so you know, going by that and saying that he was surrounded by his family when he passed, I'm assuming, he must have been feeling not too well or whatever it was for a little bit.
Yeah, shout out to our old school homie Jim Bag Jr. for his occasional banter back and forth with Big George on Twitter.
Oh man, he had some of the absolute. Jim Bag was such a good was one of the best followers ever on Twitter back in the day. That dude was absolutely hysterical.
Well meaning, but he definitely knew how to get it out of motherfuckers. That's for sure.
Without like, well, I mean, sometimes he was a little over the top, you know what I mean? But like,
Yeah,
absolutely a lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
he was over the top.
He
But
went past the line a number of times.
sure.
But like I said, usually well meaning.
He did
Look,
one time. He had one that I think I talked to you the other day about, which had me laughing, and he said something to the effect of he was like he put like in quotes, he was like boxing is like sex. Long, hard, draining sex. George Foreman, 1991. And then George saw it and it like within a half an hour, like quote tweeted it. It was like, "This wasn't me. I would never say anything like this." Blah 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 blah. And he was like, "Plus, my wife would have killed me." And, it was just like funny, like the way he would just say random shit like that. But yeah, it was just sad.
yeah, you brought up 2009, and I mean that's probably going to be, readily available in a lot of people's minds when you bring up a string of deaths or tragedies or whatever in boxing or for boxing fans. And it makes sense too, but I think what also kind of hits a little bit different here is obviously that we're older, but also on top of that, neither George Foreman or Livingston Bramble, like at least that we know of, like they just died. Like it wasn't like, those were all Alexis Arguello, Arturo Gotti, and Vernon Forrest were all violent, like untimely deaths that, for fucking, they made no sense type of shit. However you feel about Arguello and Gotti, I mean, that's its entire own show, true crime, etc. They've already written books about it, but point is, these just happened. Like they happened because they did, and so it makes us, I think, feel a little bit older, a little bit more like holy fuck, kind of shocked about it, and a lot of it, especially like you said too, is that we remember it, dude. My mom, was only a couple years, I believe, younger than Muhammad Ali. I want to say he was born in 42, I think. And so my mom's only a couple years younger than Muhammad Ali. When she was, in her fucking heyday, like in her late teens, early 20s, there was so much social turmoil with the civil rights movement, and among other things, international incidents and everything. And Muhammad Ali was such a massive figure in terms of celebrity and also the way that he tied into shit that was going on socially. And, you and I, we're too young. We weren't around for we weren't around to remember Muhammad Ali in that way. And in fact, if you would have shown me, by the time like the early 80s came about, it's not that Muhammad Ali disappeared from the public eye because he definitely did not. But he kind of disappeared from the boxing eye. Like he wasn't really around for much in boxing at that point. Occasional appearances at cards, sure. But if you would have shown me a photo of Muhammad Ali or asked me when I was a kid, I've been like, I don't know. Like, I don't know who that is. But then starting in like, the late 80s, early 90s, show me a picture of George Foreman. I knew who that was. And that's not to obviously not to downgrade Muhammad Ali. Obviously not downgrade Muhammad Ali here. Point being what it meant to us, what it symbolized to us. It wasn't until much later that I understood what Muhammad Ali was and who he was. You know, like I remember being 13 and watching the 1996 Olympic ceremony, the opening ceremony when Ali, I watched it with my mom and my mom was kind of like, oh, you know, sad watching it. And that's kind of all that I knew. You know what I mean? I didn't really know too much more than that. By that time, when I was 13, it was 1996. George Foreman was still semi active. He was still technically lineal champion. So, I mean, you know, for us, that meant a little bit more. He kind of not, obviously, not in the same way in terms of impact, in terms of celebrity status and notoriety, but he kind of was our Muhammad Ali in that regard. You know what I mean? He didn't stick around and he didn't have as many comebacks within our lifetime. But in terms of big figures and in terms of, you know, somebody who was like kind of like safe
Mm.
to like or to root for, that was George Foreman. You know, that was not Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was not safe to root for. You know, he was, you know, white America didn't like that foo. So, you know, yeah, man, that was, like I said, when it happened, I wasn't like shocked. He's old and
Yeah.
he's slowed down a lot in recent years. Like that video that was kind of funny from a couple of years ago where he was like in his garage and almost tripped over his car. And everyone was like, ah, George. It's like fucking
Mhm.
like whoop, 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 you know, almost falling and shit. He, you know, he's looked old for a bit. So I wasn't shocked, but I wasn't ready for it.
Well, there was also that video too where he was hitting the heavy bag and everyone initially assumed that it was him still hitting it because it looked ridiculous, you know what I mean? But then
Come on, social media. Come on, video editing. You
But
dummies.
but still, even in the video when he was being shown in it, he looked healthy, like facial wise and all that. Like he
Yeah, he didn't
just
look awful or anything. He just looked old.
no, he just looked yeah, exactly. He looked old, but he still sounded like the George of I'm gonna come back and do it again, boom, and like whatever. And yeah, you like you said the to piggyback off of what you said, you're absolutely right. And to give you an example, the what is it, the Howard Bingham Muhammad Ali book? What is that called? Muhammad Ali, My Life with Him, or some my French, some kind of I don't know. I got a Muhammad Ali
Something like
hardcover
that.
book
Yeah.
when I was a kid, around 1995 or so. And I want definitely had the George Foreman video game for Sega way before then. I'm talking like 1992, 1993. So I was well
Mm-hmm.
aware of who George Foreman was. And I was aware of who Muhammad Ali was too, but like you said, I wasn't aware of his impact and everything. I was just knowing that he was a former heavyweight champion that I was slowly learning about. But Foreman was already just not even me following him as a boxing career because I wasn't really into boxing so much as a kid like that early on. But you would see him around. Like the commercials would be on, even, about him running around eating donuts and Doritos and pizza and shit like that and KFC and all this other stuff while he's like doing road work and there was all these other things. And sometimes, my dad would be watching boxing in the background while I'd be playing somewhere and I'd see him commentating. So like I was more aware of who he was just culturally wise than Ali. And as it came in and as I became a fan, then of course, I fell in love with George as everyone else did, as just being like, the biggest fan of his. But like we said, it's a huge impact and it's a huge loss because he's one of those guys that's looked upon now as an all-time great. And for a division as deep as heavyweight, the oldest and deepest division there is in boxing, going back as much as it is, to be considered in the top 10 and in the upper top 10 of all-time heavyweights is an accomplishment in itself. And considering what he was able to accomplish too, because his first career, as great as it was not going to warrant him that type of ranking. It was what he was able to do afterwards, and that's what makes him so remarkable. So going back in time, he was born and raised in Texas. What was it, Marshall or Houston? Well, I mean, he grew up in Houston's Fifth Ward, but like
Yeah.
um
Yeah. I think he was born in your Marshall, Texas.
okay, sure. But growing up in was it it's Fifth Ward, right?
I think so.
So it's one of the most notorious projects in all of America when it comes down to it. It's one of those ones that definitely stand out, has a lot of history and just a lot of bad history to it. And if you read George's autobiography, which all of us probably did, the one he came out with in the 90s, I don't have it in front of me right now, but he goes into detail about his upbringing over there. And it was not pretty whatsoever, like a really rough time. And one of those type of backgrounds and neighborhoods that either you are going to be a bully or you were going to get bullied and you were going to get hurt and just kind of fall along. And George, being the biggest one out of his family, Again, I don't have how many relatives he had, like siblings, I mean, growing up, but like he grew up in a very rough household and he was already on the street immediately early on. But given his size, given, his overall size being bigger than the average kid his age, kind of like how Mike Tyson was in Brooklyn, gave him a big advantage over everyone else in the neighborhood. So he quickly was able to find out, look, if I exert my strength, exert my like, power and dominance over people, and he didn't really give a fuck either. He was callous and mean about it. Then he could do whatever he want. And pretty soon he was running his neighborhood as well, but like running that deep, that really thin line where he was about to get caught either way. You know what I mean? Like it was not going to end well for him unless he found a way out. And at first, it looked like he wasn't going to find a way out.
Once you start getting into certain kinds of crimes,
Mhm.
there's there you can't like run. You know what I mean? Unless you actually like try to fucking escape, get away somewhere. Once you get into certain kinds of crimes, like you're either gonna die or go to prison. And that's kind of where George started getting into, I think. And luckily, he was stopped from getting too far into it and was redirected toward Job Corps.
Mhm.
And that became kind of like a big selling point for Job Corps for a while too. Was that here's this young, incorrigible kid who was a criminal and had his life completely turned around by Job Corps, and now look at him, he's an Olympian.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not, there's nothing incorrect about that. Obviously, was it only Job Corps? No. But nonetheless, it obviously turned his life around. And, if you look at videos from him training and from his videos from the Olympics, he was in tremendous shape, massive guy, just, a big puncher even then, if
Mhm.
nothing else, there's that age old debate, are punchers born or made? I think that the vast majority of us believe that like they're generally born. Like obviously you can maximize power. There's a lot of ways to up your technique and et cetera, et cetera. But it just seems that there's something, heavy hands, whatever. George had those motherfuckers. That's for sure. You watch videos of him hitting the heavy bag back in the day, and I said this the other day when you and I were talking about it, bro. I have the exact same heavy bag in my garage, that big ass Everlast canvas heavy bag, the
Mhm.
one that it's like it hurts your arms, like it
Oh
fucks
yeah.
you up. It's 100 pound, just 100 pounds. It's not the 120, just 100 pound heavy bag. Like I can make it move, but like, hitting it, that dude was like breaking those things, tearing through them, fucking them up. I'm like dead after like a few minutes. And that guy was that just, and I'm not even like that much smaller of a human being than him. The
Mhm.
point is, his hands were so heavy. It's insane. If when Puncher doesn't even have to like move his arm back, he doesn't even have to like cock his fist or anything, but just moves his hand and that hurts you. That's a genuine puncher, bro. That was George Foreman. And you don't see punchers like that very often at all. And even when you do, they often don't make it to the top. Twice, 20 years apart.
And you have to think too, he almost didn't even make it in boxing to begin with because when he first initially joined Job Corps, he was still as much of a punk as he was on the streets of Houston back in the day. And he talked about that in detail in his book. He said that there was an incident one time as a child, or well, I mean as a teenager, where there was these two guys who were rampaging through the neighborhood. They knew him, George knew him, the guy, they knew each other, cross paths, whatever, but they never really like bothered each other because those guys knew to keep, they just kept their distance from each other, right? Always just kind of doing their own thing. And then one day, those two guys beat up George's friend and robbed him in XYZ. So George was like, yo, I gotta go look for him. And then one day he pulled up and they ran into each other with a crowd around. And the guy was like, then one of them, he had his boy with him who had like a giant stick or something. And the other guy had a knife and he was like, you want some? And George backed away. And then when George backed away, he felt like a coward, and everyone he said in the neighborhood kind of made him feel like, oh man, yeah, George is a punk. He backed away from that dude. So he let that eat at him for a few weeks, and then he found the dude again, punked him out. The guy didn't even fight. He was like, nah, man, I don't want a piece of you, George, and like ran away from it, whatever. But George, after that, was like, now I'm the king of the jungle. I'm going to keep that mentality. He goes to the Job Corps, same thing. He's just like being mean, everything like that, bullying people around because he's bigger than everyone else, even though these guys have come from bad backgrounds. George is still king. And I think the story goes, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when the person who got called in there was a Doc Brodus who like found him in the room, and George was like Chuck was about to throw someone out the
I
window.
think so, yeah.
And I think it was over something like stealing his cookies of all things, chocolate chip cookies, I believe it was. And George got pissed about that. I mean, as anyone would really if you love chocolate chip cookies. And like I certainly do. And like George,
Sprinkle some sea salt on them bitches. Yeah.
I'm saying. So like George grabbed, I guess was in the process, and he grabbed the guy up and was halfway through throwing him out the window before someone was like, "Bro, chill the fuck out." And was like, "Why don't you try that with me?" And George looked at him quizzically, like any giant person would, as someone small at them challenging him, and then well, joined boxing. But like you said, um, it culminated into an unlikely Olympic win because he didn't have a long amateur career at all. Like he just kind of joined and he moved up the ranks quickly and actually lost a couple of times too. There was a guy out there who did have his number. Like Larry Holmes had a couple of guys like Nick Wells had Larry Holmes' number. Um it was Clay Hodges, who was a white heavyweight from the 60s who would go on to become a Hollywood stuntman, I think. But he beat George twice. I think he beat him an AAU championship, I want to say, and then he beat him in another time. And George got really discouraged by that, but eventually went on and then went on to become a gold medalist. But when he turned pro, that's the thing about now. Correct me if I'm wrong too. When he turns pro now, was did he already have Archie Moore in his corner along with Dick Sadler and Sandy Sadler, or no?
I'd have to look because I don't remember. I even looked that up the other day, but I smoked
Yeah.
so much fucking cannabis that I can't fucking remember what the answer was. But I know that they were with him for a long time, like for the majority of his like first career or whatever. I don't know if it was from his pro debut on though. I just know that it was really early.
But one interesting correlation with his early career and late career is that George took on the mentality of fighting very, very frequently. Well, I mean, back then it was a different era. Like in the late 60s, George was the gold medalist in the was it 68 Olympics, and then turns pro a number of months later. As he does, he immediately like he's fighting not only he's fighting sometimes every other weekend, and then he starts fighting at least like once a month on average. And he's going through it. And that back then there was a lot of heavyweights that you could fight that was going to get you good experience. And if now I'm on his record right now, he did fight some really good, like I'm not going to say really good fighters, but I'm going to say like guys who are like experienced ones that you want to go in the ring with.
Wepner in his fourth fight,
I'm saying, like,
I mean, not that Wepner was super special necessarily, but in his fourth fight, that's some
and this
shit.
was a Chuck, and so this is 1969. This is a Chuck Wepner that had just gone in, or he was about to go in with Sonny Liston soon after this, probably. And had also, fought around with Ernie Terrell and others. So I mean, Wepner was mixing in with like top guys at this point. Roy Cookie Wallace, Roberto Davila, Bob Hazelton, and then he goes the distance for the first time with a guy named Levy or Levi Forte. So the only reason why I'm going to stop on him really quick is because there's an interesting story with this guy. He was a popular fighter in the Miami Beach area. Not a really good record, kind of ham and egg, or that lost to most of the better guys he fought. But he was a bellhop for the Fonta, I want to say like the Fontainebleau Hotel or one of those
Yep.
around. And at one time, he became voted was it South Miami or Miami's most popular bellhop. Like he was really popular around there. Everybody loved him. And so, he was good friends with Bojack, and he like met Frank Sinatra and a bunch of other people that came through the hotel. Long story short, in the 90s, when George had made his comeback and everyone else around then decided they wanted to make a comeback too to make some money, Levi Forte decided that he wanted to do it as well, and then he started making news that he was training back in Miami, and the Ring even wrote a little blurb in one of the early article, like in the beginning of the magazine about it. You see him there looking very old because he had no business trying to fight, and he has his hands wraps, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to fight George again, blah 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 blah," because I was the first person to go to distance with him, and I want a rematch. Obviously, it never happened, but he did end up having a fight at the age of like 58 or 59, which he lost a decision and then he never fought again. But just wanted to bring that up as an interesting point. But I mean, these again after that, like you got Charlie Polite, Jack O'Halloran, who then he was like a giant, right?
Well, that's the dude Non from Superman 2.
That's what I was gonna say. He was in a movie. I wasn't gonna say the Hulk because that was Lou Ferrigno. So
Yeah, he was Non from Superman 2, the big bearded guy. And I mean he had a beard for like a handful of his fights, but he normally fought like clean shaven or whatever. And he was just a big dude, kind of
yeah,
lumbering, not a bad fighter, but not a very good fighter either. Kind of like a middling heavyweight. The only thing I was going to say about Levi Forte is that the Fontainebleau Hotel was kind of like a known hangout for a bunch of boxing people, including the Dundees, fucking, Angelo Dundee and Chris Dundee. And like you said, Bo Jack used to shine shoes at the Fontainebleau Hotel, and there were a number of other fighters who worked at the Fontainebleau Hotel like throughout the years. I want to say Kid Gavilan, when he lived in Miami for a bit, worked there for a bit, etc. So yeah, that was like a kind of like a known boxing hangout in Miami. But yeah, going back to George Foreman's career, like, guys like Jack O'Halloran, like I said, like kind of middling. But when you're in like your first handful of fights or first couple dozen fights and you're fighting often, and that's the guy you're fighting, 1 week, and then like the next week or 2 weeks later, you're fighting again. That's significant. That's not, when you're going through that level of fighter, that's the kind of thing where I know that it's a lot easier with BoxRec now, and that's nothing against BoxRec. I love it, use it every fucking day. But it also can be like in the wrong hands. It can be fucking used incorrect, kind of like CompuBox. In the wrong hands, people point to it and they're idiots. And so basically, you could go through a fighter's career and just start picking it apart. Oh, well, he's fought Jack O'Halloran, fought Charlie Polite. Who cares about these guys? Look at their records. But you have to put it in context. He's also going through a lot of these guys, and it's also disposing of them. He's not just like, struggling through this fucking series of characters. He's just running through the vast majority of these fighters like they're nothing. And almost all these fighters years later are going like, "Oh yeah, George Foreman. I don't really want to talk about that." Like they're, this serious shit here. So it's not like, it's not like some bum struggling with a bunch of dudes. And they'll say the same kind of thing about like Julio Cesar Chavez. Oh, he fought a bunch of bums. And it's like, dude, you don't understand though. Even if you have these kinds of records, even if you were correct and you're not, that it's a bunch of bums, he's running through a bunch of bums, which is not easy. So point is, going back to George Foreman, even early in his career, fucking monster.
yeah. So actually, I take that back. I thought Levi Forte was the first one to go the distance with Foreman. It was actually Roberto Davila, but that doesn't matter. Neither here nor there. But so back to his career, like he fights Gregorio Peralta, who's best known for being a light heavyweight. Like he was a tall guy and a lanky guy, but he was definitely not a big heavyweight, on the lighter side. And fought Willie Pastrano twice for the light heavyweight championship. A very competent fighter, not one of those guys that was like overly skilled, but
Super popular in
yeah,
Argentina.
yeah, and awkward as fuck, and gave Foreman absolute hell. Those were actually the fights that they would show on the early days of Classic Sports Network for Foreman because I think what was it? Let me see right now to look at it. Yeah, I think they both went the distance. So they both got shown on the early days. I remember watching those. But I mean, again, like, Gregorio Peralta fighting him, and look at his
He had like
record.
95 fights or something like that at
Absolutely.
that
He's
point.
already
Yeah.
74-5 right there. And then George Johnson in 1970. And again, that's his record too that like in the wrong hands, people are like 17-19. What does that mean? Scrap Iron Johnson was one of the most durable fighters, heavyweights for that matter, of the 60s and of the 60s. A guy that you wanted to go rounds, you fought Scrap Iron Johnson. Sometimes he got stopped, but he was never really knocked out, if anything. And there was that famous
Yeah,
story of
you're
him.
gonna have to work.
Yeah. And there was that famous story of him when he found out there was a major bet on him not lasting the distance with Joe Frazier. So he said he took a big boulder and put it on the side of his face and was running the hills of like where of his hometown and people were looking at him oddly like what the fuck is this guy doing? Just to build his like jaw muscles up and he went the distance with Frazier. And so he bet on himself to win that, won a ton of money. And then they said next time you saw him he had a brand new car and he had a cigar in his mouth and he was chilling. But
Just
again,
that's
so
the only boxing could produce a guy ran around with a rock on his face.
and he even said he looked ridiculous. He said that he had a giant rock on the side of his head with like kind of haphazardly taped over there. So I'm sure it could have slipped and like banged his knee or anything and fucked him up before the fight. But he said he was running the hills and he said people would just be outside going, because
Like
of
the
course he would.
It's like the old stories where they, like Burt Sugar and people like that used to say shit like, Jack Dempsey used to rub brine on his face and soak his face so that he couldn't be cut. It's like, that's not a fucking scientific. What? Shut up. That didn't stop it, you guys. But still, great stories. That's fucking hilarious. Rock on his face.
And yeah, it's hilarious. But so by the mid 1970 now, he's really stepping up his competition, fighting the likes of George Chuvalo. And Chuvalo, we enough doesn't have to be said about him, where being one of the most durable fighters in boxing history. And
That was
a
a
guy
three
who was
round beatdown, bro.
absurdly bad one. And this is when people are like, I mean, they were already taking notice to it earlier on, but like it was at this point, the public was just kind of being like, whoa, because Foreman was giving off this thing where, and we got to mention this too, because I don't even think we brought this up. Aside from him just getting all this experience of like training and sparring and like knocking out all these experienced heavyweights, whether they had good records or not, he was also the main sparring partner of Sonny Liston because Dick Sadler was Sonny Liston's trainer and manager as well. And so like taking George Foreman on as his guy, well, now he has someone that Sonny can spar with because Sonny Liston was just as ruthless as George Foreman was when it came to sparring and just in general. And Foreman had said it many times that Sonny Liston was the only guy that ever stood up to him, that was able to stay on to him and just back him up man to man like that, especially in his early days. And the amount of experience he was able to gather from Sonny and just working with him was like insurmountable. Liston obviously wasn't much of a talker. Foreman chronicled it in his book, but he said he got enough out of Liston, not so much from like their conversations, which it was very little, but it was he said it was just watching him train and like the way he would just, teach him little certain things, especially in their sparring sessions and how to, the pacing of things and how to use your jab and like everything like that. He just picked up a fuck ton. And if you watch his fights in his early on, especially the way Ali would make fun of him and his windmilling and all this other crap, but if you really watch him too, there was definitely a science to Foreman's way. And I mean, yeah, he would definitely get in trouble now with like the shoving he would do. Definitely couldn't get away with that today the way he did back then. That was a key component to his game. But the way he would be able to keep you away with his jab and knew like the set of distance of like where he needed you, so where he would like his clubbing shots would have the best maximum effort on it and how to put you in position to knock you around and all that. And it was much more less refined than it was for his second career, but everything was there early on, which made it even more scarier. So the way he's bludgeoning these guys now, and no one's being able to just can stand with him. Like he's just an absolute monster with this. There's a few dudes who can go like many rounds, but like at this point, it's absurd. So moving on all the way to 1973 now when he fights Joe Frazier for the belt. I mean, Foreman is an absolute unit. Like if he's gonna be ready, it's gonna be at this point. And it comes for perfect timing because ever since Joe Frazier defeated Muhammad Ali in the fight of the century in 1971, he's defended his title since then and he's been successful, but you could also get the sense that he's been coasting a bit. His, title contenders weren't really that amazing. Like, yeah, I think he beat Terry Daniels and I don't know who else after that, but it was just it seemed like he had taken his foot off the pedal a little bit. And so coming in there and now going into Jamaica when there was all these rumors that Frazier wasn't really training as hard as he could. He was out there by the poolside singing karaoke every night and doing other various things. Well, Foreman was like Clubber Lang in the gym, hitting bags, getting angry, growling, hurting sparring partners, breaking Dick Sadler's hands with his punches as, poor Sadler holds the heavy bag, a job I would never envy. And it all culminated in that one night in January 22nd, 73.
Yeah, it was Terry Daniels and Ron Stander. So, I
Yeah.
mean, not good
Not harder
training
as well.
for Foreman at all. No. And I mean, look, Joe Frazier also, people recognized at the time, he defeated Muhammad Ali, and that was massive, but he was a vulnerable looking fighter. He was the fighter that kind of fighter that generally tends to burn out quickly, does not last a whole lot, and could be vulnerable against certain styles. And that's exactly what wound up happening. He was vulnerable against somebody with a style who could keep him on the end of their punches. And unlike Muhammad Ali, had massive power. And so, that was a real key component to George Foreman and the mentality too, obviously. But, George joked years later that Frazier was the hardest puncher he faced. I don't even know how he would know. He didn't really take anything like full force like that because Joe didn't even really get a chance. Like he was getting pushed back onto his heels pretty much the entire fight, and Joe couldn't really fight like that. He couldn't really get his power like into his hook that way. He had an underrated right hand. It was just that it never really came into play, and Foreman just beat the hell out of him. He just beat the shit out of him as soon as he started to connect. And yeah, dude, there are very, very few times in the course of history has the actual heavyweight championship changed hands in a way where it was just like, holy shit,
Yeah.
and not like fluky, like, wow, that was fucking, like Rockman Lewis or something like that, where you're kind of just like, holy shit, where'd that come from? Who's that guy or something like that? But where you're just kind of looking there like, who is gonna stand up to this fucking guy? And that was one of those times. Dempsey, Willard, obviously a time when a lot of people thought that way. They probably wouldn't think that now because Dempsey's just such a small looking guy. But back then, 6 foot tall was, whoa, that's a massive guy. So, point being, just one of the most shocking and brutal fucking exhibitions in heavyweight championship history.
Oh, and absolutely. And like the public had never really seen anything like that. I mean, to a degree, you could say Sonny Liston and Floyd Patterson, but the size differential was there, and everyone knew that Liston was going to like knock him out,
Yeah.
and it was just
And
not a
Floyd
matter
had
of,
been down against like everybody. I
yeah,
mean, that shit was like a long time coming for a lot of people.
same. And like Johansson, Patterson, but same thing, like you said, Patterson was just one of those guys that got dropped by everybody. So it wasn't like, oh my God. Frazier had been hurt before. Bonaveno had dropped him twice. Ali, others. Corey had like rocked him a little bit. Like he could be hit, but at the same time, I don't think anyone expected a guy like Foreman, who the public just again they didn't know how much he could really handle at that point because like he had fought credible guys, but like he had gone through them like butter, like a hot knife through butter that he people didn't really know. Okay, Frazier's gonna make him gut it out a little bit, and like once he gets him in the trench, because no one thought what was gonna happen was gonna actually happen like that. So they're like, okay, like if he's gonna be able to gut it out, and then once Joe takes him deep, that's when we're gonna see Foreman's medal. I bet you he drowns and da 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 da, because that's what Frazier did to everybody. But then, as Eddie Futch said, and everyone else kind of, I guess, noticed in the arena that night, the first time Frazier came barreling in, throwing his hooks and stuff like that, and Foreman just grabbed him and went ugh effortlessly, and Frazier went flying back. And that's when that first time happened. Eddie Futch said in the corner, he was like, "Uh-oh, we're in trouble." Because he knew right then, like, this dude is
Yeah,
way too far.
if you can't outstrength him,
Yeah.
you're in the shit, buddy.
And it was almost effortless the way he did it. It was almost like, like when a little 5-year-old comes running up to you and you just put your hand like there and just throw him back. That's what Foreman basically did to him. He just flung him like it was nothing. And then Frazier came barreling ahead again, boom, boom. And then after, a couple of minutes or so, that's when you hear like Foreman catches him with like a right hand or something. And then
Down goes Frazier.
you hear
Down
that little
goes
bounce though.
Frazier.
You hear the bounce before that, where you see Frazier do like a little bounce, and then you hear Angelo Dundee yell out, "Frazier's hurt! Frazier's hurt!" And I'm sure he was giddy about that because Frazier had beat his man, so and Jimmy Ellis for that matter. So you hear him go, "Frazier's hurt," and then you hear Howard Cosell, "Oh, Angelo Dundee," because he always loved to name drop people sitting next to him, whatever. Angie Dundee sitting right next to me, and like you yelled, and all he says, "Frazier's hurt." I think he down goes Frazier, and then that becomes one of the most iconic calls in boxing history. And yeah, that was a movie that Howard Cosell painted that day. I mean, like, say what you want about him as an analyst, because there's a lot of love and there's a lot of hate that are both justified for him. But that was a masterpiece he pulled there, and that night in Kingston.
Yeah, people say that shit all the time, like every single day, and some of them don't even know what it's from. Don't even know. No clue. That shows you how fucking yeah, how great a call that was. Nobody says it happened. Nobody says that. Nobody gives a shit about
Yeah.
that. Sorry, Lamps. Nobody does. But that being said, bro, it's also the fact that it happened in Kingston, Jamaica. This is like the heyday of the, exotic location. We already did a show about this, but the exotic location fucking fights, Kuala Lumpur,
Mm.
fucking going to Germany, going to Budokan, going to Caracas, which we'll get to in a second, Kinshasa, etc. Just, and
The
that's just
heavyweight
Foreman.
champion actually defended around the world.
Yeah, and that's just actually, well, Foreman wasn't the one that went to. Anyway, point
Yeah,
being, yes, yeah, just the exotic location thing in the late 60s, early 70s, and throughout the 70s and into the 80s, actually.
sure.
Wild.
It was, and to get back onto the like what was I was saying about like how the public had never seen anything like that. Like the Dempsey thing was different. Like Dempsey had this different ferocity, like the way he tore into somebody, but like you could see the effort he had to put into it to do that to Willard. I think what scared the shit out of the public and everyone in general, and like when like the late great Ralph Wiley said on the Legendary Nights episode about Foreman. He was like, when he hit Joe Frazier, I thought the world was coming to an end. It was because of how effortlessly he did it. Like it looked like he was putting no effort into these punches. The way Frazier was bouncing around, and like
Same
Frazier
thing
was
as
popping.
Liston.
Yeah,
Just like he was just doing everything,
but
whatever.
like
He was just doing
even
whatever.
even more scarier because like, I don't think Liston would have done that to Frazier. Like no one could have in history. It just hits him. Frazier just goes flying, hits him again. Blah 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 blah. And then there's that one part where Frazier's like almost running away, and Foreman just hits him on the side of the head and almost in the back, and you see Frazier do like the double step and just collapse again. And and at one point when Frazier's down, you see Foreman go over him. And he goes like that, just like scary shit. And then after he wins, he celebrates a little bit, but at first he wasn't celebrating. He was just kind of in the corner, standing coldly there.
Yeah, like there's that fucking picture of Sonny Liston after he knocks out Albert Westfall, and
Mm,
he's in the corner and like standing in the corner, and he's just like
yeah.
going like that, and Westfall's fucking carcass is splayed out on the canvas, and like you could see that Sonny Liston's team is like trying to like or something like that with him, and he's just standing there like, because it's like, dude, it's just a job. He didn't give a fuck. He's coming to like lay waste to fools and then go home.
There's that amazing photo of Liston, like a super color really clear color one of him after he beats Patterson for the belt. And all of his cornermen and like, a couple of friends are there, like all very excitedly hugging him and stuff like that. And the most you get out of Liston is just like a nice little smirk. Like he's clearly happy, but he's not even like, smiling ear to ear or nothing. He's just
Just it's just menacing, dude.
yeah.
And on top of that, he continued the menacing into his first, well, his only two title defenses. Uh, I don't know the details because I had never seen any video of it or anything like that. Although I've seen it reported that supposedly Jose Roman called Foreman something bad at their weigh-in, something racist.
Mm.
Again, I don't know what it was. Wasn't there, couldn't say. However, George definitely fought as if that was the case because that dude treated Roman like he was trash and like, hit him while he was down, was hitting him low, forearming, elbowing, just like absolutely beating just the ever living shit out of Roman, who was this poor, not undefeated, but I think that was his, maybe, gosh, his second. Point is, he got
I'm
treated.
looking right here. He has 7 losses at that point,
Yeah,
but still.
but it was his. I want to say his shit. I'd have to look at his record. I'm not gonna do that right now. Point is, he got absolutely crumbled. That last uppercut that he got hit with, and he just like goes limp, like into like a pile in on the canvas, is like, oh my god, like that's an underrated knockout just for that. Because Jordan, and again, just like some of his other knockouts, acts like it was nothing. Just hits him and then just goes, yeah, okay, bye.
Oh, there's a famous photo that I want to say was in it was in the Ring magazine time capsule from the 90s. I don't know which one it was, but the there was it's an incredible photo and actually kind of sad too because you just feel for Roman. But I want to say Roman's manager was Al Braverman. Um I think it was. It had to have been, I'm pretty sure it was Al Braverman. But anyways, Braverman is looking at Roman as arguing with the referee because like you said, Foreman hit him while he was down. And he's arguing with him and he's like, screaming and pointing and stuff like that. But if you look in the background, only feet away, Roman is laying there by himself on the canvas, still half unconscious, looking up, just like, mouth agape, and he just looks completely out of sorts. and no one is looking at him and trying to take care of him or trying to like, look for his well-being. Instead, you just want to argue with the referee over something that's not going to get overturned.
Yeah, dude. I mean, he probably got done dirty that night. I'm not gonna lie. Like, should Foreman have gotten disqualified? Like, objectively, everything objective, probably for real. Not even kidding. However, is that ever going to happen in a heavyweight championship fight in modern times? Usually not. No, that's not usually going to happen, especially not against like the favorite. That's not usually going to happen. But yeah, treated him poorly.
Closest we got was Buster Mathis and Bo.
Jesus. Yeah. Well, and they did everything they could because he should have been DQ'd
Sure. Yeah.
regardless. Yeah. Then Norton, again, another exotic locale fight that almost wound up turning out disastrously for everybody. Don King got his grubby little paws and all this stuff, somehow set up something with the government of Venezuela to set this fight up. And then they did it and everything. There's like armed guards stationed all out in the arena and all this type of shit. And supposedly, after we'll talk about the fight in a second, but almost that neither Foreman or Norton, sorry, both of them almost didn't. I was trying to figure out how to word that in my head. Both of them almost did not leave the country safely and with all of their money because they were basically stuck up. Poor Norton, after getting the absolute crap kicked out of him. There's like various photos of him in like midair poses getting fucking, splattered. Poor guy.
So, I mean, another one that kind of made the public think that, okay, George Foreman might reign forever if he wants to. Ken Norton at that point had just gone through two fights with Muhammad Ali, but I mean, the first one where he breaks his jaw and scores a massive upset, and then with the second fight where a lot of people thought he might have deserved the decision in that anyways, um, I mean, like people thought he was going to pose Foreman problems. I mean, you beat Ali, then, he probably just A plus B equals he's gonna be able to do that against anybody.
Right.
Uh, besides
And
being
he
money.
looked the part. He looked skilled. He was kind of hulking looking. He was athletic. He was a good
Yeah.
fighter. So like, it made sense.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was like kind of alluding to is that like with his build and like his awkward style with the crab defense and the things that, the way he fights and all that and like just looking like an overall good fighter that most people thought that at least he would give Foreman a good fight. I don't think, and again, anyone would thought he was just going to ravage through him the way he did. Norton, we'd come to find out, would have like problems like dealing with big punchers throughout his career, but like, yeah, it was almost comical the way Foreman kind of tore through him. Not to say that Norton didn't land, like he tried. He was trying to stand in there with the pocket with George, but like, where his style was kryptonite to Ali because Ali just had, being an outside boxer, had trouble trying to like deal with that defense and Norton being able to jab with him and all that. Foreman was just way too powerful. And when Norton tried to stand there, like Foreman, like that whole defense had no business doing anything with like a Foreman uppercut. Foreman just, it goes right through that shit. Like, you know, and after a few swings, boom, 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 Norton goes down, gets up, gets dropped again. Like, I mean, it was bad. It was really, really bad.
Yeah, dude. He looked like it was they weren't even in like the same class. And so you could understand, like a lot of these things make sense. Like you see him run through these fighters like Joe Frazier gives Muhammad Ali hell and defeats him, and George Foreman just beats the crap out of him, makes him look like nothing. Ken Norton gives Muhammad Ali hell, breaks his jaw, and gives him hell twice. And then George Foreman treats him like nothing. So it makes sense, you going into those fights. Obviously, hindsight's 2020 now, but going into that fight, it makes sense why everybody would be like, "Man, Ali's in trouble." Like, I don't know why he'd be thinking about doing this. Like, he's already slowed down. He's not a
Mm-hmm.
big puncher. He's this is going to be bad for him. And obviously, there's a lot of extracurriculars there, a lot of stuff going on around, like in terms of like socially, the setting, the promotion. Like, there's so much going on, but still, that's obviously a massive moment in both the careers of George Foreman and Muhammad Ali.
I mean, it's goes down today still. as one of the, if not the most famous fight in history. I mean, like a lot of people talk about that or say like, I mean, there's a lot of famous, all-time famous fights in history, but just in terms of like historical significance and, with a concert attached to it, and the fact there's been documentaries like in movies like When We Were Kings and all these other things that go along with it. Like it's one of those things that go down in history that overpasses boxing, eclipses it by that far. Like Joe Louis, Max Schmeling, they're in that rematch overall for what it meant for America is one of those, the first Ali Frazier fight. Certain fights just overall eclipse everything, the sport and just what it means in the world. And Foreman Ali, where initially I don't think it was going on to that regard. What I just everything that happened made it that way. Like I think if Foreman bludgeoned Ali the way he was supposed to, I'm not sure if it would be held in the same high regard. It would just be like, oh, another fight that was held in a crazy location, but
Yep.
it was just the significance of what actually happened and unfolded.
No question. It helped really boost the legend of Ali. Um, and I mean, he'd already been a legend before that, so it's not like if he hadn't done that, he would have been fine. He told it's still been a legend, but then he really became a legend that night and did it off the back of George Foreman, who, his effort gets downplayed. I get it, but man, he beat the shit out of Ali that night too. Like a lot, I know that that gets forgotten because it was a massive triumph for Ali, which it was. But
Mhm.
he beat the shit out of Ali in a couple of those rounds. Like he really cracked the crap out of him, and it was just the combination of Ali's insane toughness, determination, a little bit of trickery with the ropes and shit like that. But it wasn't like George Foreman wasn't in that fight or something. It wasn't like it didn't show up or something like that. But everybody knows about that, and that really threw Foreman for a loop, dude. Like that fucked him up mentally for a long time. And he talked about that in his book, in a couple books he kind of talked about that. He talked about it in the kind of spiritual and religious sense that it really shook his character in terms of religion and shook his spirituality. But it also, it really rearranged his career and called into question his confidence as a person and as a fighter. And I mean, you could see it in some funny ways, but also I think that if you're doing an actual like kind of character analysis and you're looking at George Foreman the person, he was struggling through the mid 70s, dude. And it's almost like you could go through the fights he had after that. He rematched Joe Frazier, and he didn't have as easy a time, but still disposed of poor shaved head Joe Frazier, who don't do that look ever again, Joe. But it was the wrong look. But he rematched Joe Frazier, which I also will say one thing: the fucking poster for that rematch is one of the most epic boxing posters with the fucking gladiators. That was one of the most epic boxing posters you could find on planet Earth before they had a whole bunch of photo editing and Photoshop and shit. But after that, Scott LeDouge, Dino Dennis, Pedro Augusto loses to Jimmy Young, and which is probably the most famous of those series right there because it caused George to have a religious epiphany or whatever he says in his book afterward. But he struggled. And then another key portion of there that's not on his record is the Foreman Fights 5 in Montreal, where he did the exhibition. And he fought, including,
Toronto.
or I'm sorry, yeah, Toronto. And he fought even a couple of former opponents who were way past it, but the entire time getting heckled by Muhammad Ali. And even though it's like an exhibition, he's like taking it super serious and walking over and staring Muhammad Ali down. Like people aren't just looking at him like this fucking guy's tripped out, bro. Everybody knew it. He was pretty much the only person who didn't know it. So he struggled through those years, bro.
And he was an absolute villain during that time too. Like we have to remember during the Ali fight when they brought it to when they brought it to Kinshasa. Um, the crowd immediately, way before the fight happened, was all on the side of Ali. Ali was out there with the people. He was celebrating, going down to the, village, wherever he had to be, just where people were going to be, children, anything. He was there marching with the people and celebrating and getting them chanting and promoting the shit out of it. Foreman, on the other hand, was really sullen, was barely making appearances anywhere, didn't want to be seen, was very uncomfortable being there. Um, think he claimed that Ali had a witch doctor put on him, which like freaked him the fuck out. So that's what made his appearances worse. And then on top of it, which made the public really hate him, is that Foreman came with like two German Shepherds because he loved German Shepherds, and he came with two of them. And German Shepherds are notoriously known for being
Yeah.
bad,
Police
being
dogs and yeah.
yeah, and everything like that. And that
Well,
was
and
Knuckles.
they have a very specific history with many African and black people.
Yeah, exactly. You look at a lot of apartheid books and stuff like that, and you see like policemen with those dogs holding them on by chains, and they're just looking, chomping at the bit for shit. So, yeah, that wasn't going to go well with Foreman, and it didn't. And
Yeah,
combine
he
that,
bred German shepherds. He used to breed German
it,
shepherds. Yeah.
oh, there's tons. I mean, well, not even just in Zaire, but there's tons of photos of Foreman. His happiest was with his German shepherds.
Yeah.
And
At one point, he had German shepherds, a lion, and a tiger.
and he was a good dresser too, because he would always be wearing like those really smooth ass 70s funky ass outfits with the hats with his
He
dog or
definitely
something
dressed for
like
the
that.
times. That's for sure.
Foreman
Definitely
had the
dressed for the
mountains.
times.
It was a
That fool
smooth
looked like a diesel god. I'm not gonna lie. Playing ping pong in Kinshasa, and his little hat and the fucking shirtless and the jeans and shit looked like a god.
Sure. I mean, just incredible specimen. But yeah, he loses the fight with Ali. And like you said too, it's the way he loses it. And Bert Sugar made a point about it in the Legendary Night series, where if you watch it closely, when Foreman gets up, he gets up at the count of nine. He doesn't even get up. He beats the count. Like he gets up around nine, 9.5. But he doesn't even acknowledge the referee. He just walks to his corner. Like he's completely gone. Like it's just over. Like he's mentally and physically just done. Doesn't acknowledge anything. Just walks to Archie Moore and just walks out of the ring. And like you said, he did struggle. His next fight after that, his legitimate fight after that, his first one was against Ron Lyle. And that's still
Oh yeah,
now,
I don't even know why I skipped over that. That was stupid. Yeah, stupid oversight on my part. My bad.
um, and the Lyle fight goes down as one of the greatest if not the best heavyweight brawl that was non-title heavyweight brawl in history. And just one of the greatest brawls in history. Like that fight was just absolutely insanity. And that didn't help Foreman's reputation though. That's what I'm trying to get at in terms of like being like, oh yeah, he's gonna be back again because Foreman got dropped in that fight, and he got dropped very hard. He did come back and beat Lyle, but like he even looked more pedestrian in that fight at some points than he did in the Ali one. And just
He looked like he straight up regressed. Yeah.
yeah. And he was getting hurt more than you would ever see him. Like before the Ali fight, like if he ever got tagged, you wouldn't notice. And now people are like, does he have a glass jaw? What's going on here? Because Lyle obviously was a big puncher, and he goes down as one of the better heavyweights to never win a title and just an overall rugged ass individual. But I mean, like no one had ever seen Foreman just crumple like that. Like he fell. There was one time, I want to say, what was it, like the first or second knockdown, but he fell face first and he was laying there like in a
Oh
fetal
yeah.
position, like eating
And that
fucking
shit'll
chicken.
get the fight stopped these days. Like,
That's what I'm
you
saying.
go
Yeah.
down face first, you're out of there.
It almost looked like it almost looked like he was going to end up like his idol, Sonny Liston, when Sonny got knocked out by Leotis Martin at the end of his career. It looked like it was going to kind of be like similar things, but, Foreman, to his credit, was able to come back and rally and stop Lyle. That was just an incredible brawl. Those two were always going to be intertwined with each other throughout history from that fight. Um, the Frazier fight, like you said, again, the rematch, which was just odd too, because not only did Frazier had the bald hairstyle that he did, which just looked so out of place for him. But come to find out afterwards too is that he already started having really bad eye problems, and we found out he was wearing cataracts. He was wearing contact lens in that fight, which is dangerous as fuck when you think about it.
I,
Insanely dangerous.
I can't even put them. I can't even put them in. Like, I can't even wear. I wear glasses, but like, I can't even put contacts in. I can't even imagine getting punched with them in my fucking eyes. Like, that's fucking wild.
Oh, especially by a guy like George Foreman. That just
Yeah,
shows.
and they didn't even have like nice ones back then, bro. They only had the fucking shitty, like hard ones.
That's what
Shit'll
I'm
fuck
saying.
your
They were
ass
like
up.
black and stuff. Yeah, like,
Shit.
Frazier wore those, and well, that went about as well as expected. And more or less finished his career. Like you said, Scott Ledoux, who I'll always love Scott Ledoux, man. He was a lovable guy and he meant well. He just, I mean, got his ass kicked a lot, but he was extremely
Yeah,
tough.
not a top fighter.
No.
Good dude, not a top fighter.
Dino Dennis, though, this is one I actually want to talk about really briefly. Dino Dennis was from Massachusetts. Fought in the New Bedford area actually a few times when New Bedford still had pro fights going on, and like had a gaudy record. at the time. Like, I mean, he did fight. He did have good skills. He was a decent enough boxer, but like he's just one of those guys that, hey, he's a white heavyweight that has a really good undefeated record. Okay, let's get him some attention now. So, in your first major step up again on national television, you got to fight George. Awesome. And that is one of the more brutal ones of Foreman's comeback. If you're going to look at one of them where you're like, oh shit, I think he's back, that's the one. Because it doesn't go that long. What was it? Only 3 or 4 rounds at last? Four.
Yeah,
But those 4 rounds are brutal as fuck. And it's one of those that like again, this would not happen today because they always just use these old ass referees who are completely incompetent. And that was going on in this fight. And I want to say again, I think it was Al Braverman in the corner or one of them yelling over there, "Stop it! Stop it!" And Dennis is just getting his head hit like oosh, knocked from one side to the other over and over. He's bloody, he's getting bludgeoned, and the referee's being distracted by him. And he was like, "What do you want me to do, Al? What do you want me to do?" And
yeah.
what do you
You
mean? What
call
do you
it
want me
$2.
to
You
do,
call it
boss?
fucking.
I was like, aren't you the referee? Why don't you just fucking stop it? The guy's like dying
It's your
right
fucking
there.
job, yo.
Yeah.
Fuck.
You want me to do?
Well,
Stop it.
he wasn't a bad fighter, but he definitely was the kind of fighter that was like previewing the early 80s tall, gumpy white dude with the fucking knee high socks type of fucking fighters that were like not bad, but just getting mopped by the fighters who were much better.
Yeah, like in his next time, he like went back up there. He fought Jerry Cooney, and same results. Cooney just beat the shit out of him. But yeah, the Jimmy Young fight was that was the interesting one because like if he had won that one, I don't know. I mean, he probably would have got a rematch with Ali soon after that. I think Young got the. Yeah, I think actually didn't Young already have a fight with Ali before that?
Yeah, well, yes, and the money would have been there for the Ali rematch for sure. Like, he probably would have had to perform, but
But I don't, everything like history changed that night because Foreman probably would have continued his career had he won. And going by his book, he claims that Don King told him to carry Young early on to like for commercials so they could play commercials for it being televised. They're like, don't take him out in the first round or two or whatever, like, try to make it go a little while so we can get like at least a few things of commercials in. That's what Foreman said at least. And so Foreman said the few times he hurt Young, he was like, okay, let me back off. Don told me to back off. And so he would. And then Young starts getting more and more confident. Eventually Foreman ends up getting exhausted, getting dropped, losing it. And then, like you said, afterwards he's in the locker room and he has like this religious experience, as he claims. I think it was just heat stroke, but whatever. And
exhaustion,
yeah,
dehydration, maybe a little bit of early onset CTE, etc. What we know now.
but he just went stark naked and started running around. And poor Gil Clancy and a couple others were tasked with trying to contain him. And that was his first career. So he retires after that. And unlike other heavyweights back then, as a lot of people assumed he would probably come back immediately, he didn't. Like, he found religion that night and he went deep into it. There would be, and so throughout the 80s now, so we're gonna go, it's been a decade, right? The whole division has changed. Muhammad Ali now is gone. Joe Frazier's gone. Larry Holmes is the current heavyweight champion, but also at this point, Mike Tyson has come on the scene now and no one has seen that type of ferocity since the days of Jack Dempsey because he was almost a clone of that type of dude. But during that whole time, no one, you would see random little clip like not really Foreman on TV, but like you would see interviews, like magazine interviews with him,
Hmm.
updates on
Oh
George
yeah,
Foreman and stuff like that. And when you would see him, he looked happy as hell that he was retired. He was overweight at this point. He was doing this. He's just going around
life on
preaching.
the farm, bro.
Yeah,
That's
and just
that's what he was doing.
and it seemed like he found peace and serenity, something where we all hope to find. But so at that point, when 1987 comes and he says he wants to announce his comeback, that's when everyone starts laughing their ass off because they're like, "Bro, really? Look at you. You haven't taken care of yourself. All you do is going around preaching and doing this and that. You haven't been in the gym. You haven't been active. You haven't doing anything. This is a young man's game now. You're really trying to come back?" Of course, there were people out there. They'd be like, "Well, if you really want to, I'll help you, but like." I'm trying to say this ain't gonna be successful, but I mean I'll make money off of it. And so he comes back in 87.
Yeah, man, it was definitely considered a joke. And I mean, it wasn't like he had like there was almost nobody that was really believing in him. You know what I'm saying? Like there were people who were like believing in him monetarily, like you were saying. Like they're like, "Oh yeah, you come back. Come on over here with me." No, you're always come on, it's boxing, bro. There is not a fucking thing, not one thing on the face of the planet that a person, a human being could do that would disqualify them from boxing. Not a
Mhm.
single thing. Murder, no, nothing. Nothing. Similarly, and that's not to say that George Foreman, was any of those things, but point is, like, even being like shunned from boxing, losing to Muhammad Ali, losing to Jimmy Young, and then just kind of fleeing and whatever. And people were like, you have to understand that during that time, people kind of viewed him as how other people viewed Buster Douglas. I know, I'm not saying that he was the same kind of one hit wonder. I'm simply saying that they kind of viewed him as like, where did he go? Like, damn, that dude made a splash and then just kind of jetted. Where the fuck did he go? And that's kind of how people were viewing George Foreman. So when he came back, like you said, massive joke. Nobody took it seriously. Wound up getting with our boy
Yeah.
Elvis.
Rick Elvis Parker. Yep.
Yep, wound up getting with our boy down in Florida and trying to kind of like kickstart his career that way. And then I think that I don't think that George ever said it, at least not that I ever read, but I think that he very quickly got the idea that this was a Mickey Mouse fucking Chuck E. Cheese ass operation that he had absolutely no business being around because, he was trying to put him in with like the most random cast of characters, usually people that Rick Parker had some association with or, had some chunk of or whatever, some random ass heavyweight that he had association with and whatever. So very quickly after that, I think George Foreman realized I need to get away from this shit. But if I'm going to make any money and if I'm going to actually do anything with a title or toward a title, I need to get away from this shit. And thankfully he did because who knows what would happen if George Foreman stayed tangled with that guy
It was, I think, I want to say it was like his first 3 or 4 fights. Parker was involved in that, was involved in them.
for a
Um,
minute. Yeah.
Especially if you look at the names Tim Anderson and Bobby Crabtree, Anderson especially, and that whole story and that fiasco. But by Rocky Sikorsky, which happens in Bally's, Las Vegas. Rick Parker was not involved in that one. All right, Alan Parker wasn't dealing with anything Vegas wise. He was doing the backwaters of Florida and shit.
Yeah.
So
They
at
wouldn't
this
have let him in
point,
Vegas.
no, fuck no. At this point, Bob Arum saw the potential of like making some money off of George, even if it wasn't going to bring him the championship. So he swoops in. And, Aaron was trying to look for an in at the heavyweight division anyways at this point too, because Don King basically controlled the entire thing. He was on the verge of about to get Tyson, and he had every other heavyweight that was worth a note at that point. So at that point, in '87, he fights him. And again, he's just going through like he's being very active, but he's not like fighting who's who of names. It was almost like very similar to how he was early on in his career when he first came up. But then in '88, his first actual name fighter that he fights is Dwight Muhammad Cowie, which was it's one of those fights like you watch back on it now and it's like almost incredible to think about because Cowie is my height. He's 5'7". But obviously we're not the same size. Cowie's built like a redwood and I'm certainly not. And like
Yeah.
um
That dude gave me hope. When I was actually fighting, I was like, I could actually do, maybe I could do this.
like Muggsy Bogues gave me
Yeah,
hope when I was a kid playing back.
exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was like, oh, maybe I can dunk. And here I am. I'm like 5'11", barely touching the bottom of the net with everything I got. I'm like, nah, dunking's never happening for my white ass.
And Cowie, to his credit, man, I mean, he was already past that at this point. The fact that he was fighting at heavyweight where he had no business fighting at, um, showed too. But like he landed a lot of leather on George and was overall doing pretty good on him. And it showed George's limitations at that point. And then George blamed it actually on his lightness because he came in at 235 at that fight. And 235 for him is definitely felt like he was not a good. And then he said afterwards, he's like, I feel better when I'm, bigger. So again, he's just going along the tracks, but like he's not really fighting anyone that's just like, oh my God, he's fighting Mike Tyson leftovers, in fact. Mark Young, Dave Jaco, um, future promoter Bobby Hiltz, um, former light heavyweight champ, another former light heavyweight champion JB Williamson, who looked even more ridiculous again than Cowie did because Williamson was just a skinny, scrawny guy. Um, Burt Cooper, who the hilarious story apparently before that fight was that Cooper said that he was kidnapped by what was what did he say? He said that he was romanced by two twin blondes. Yeah, blonde sisters, two twin blonde sisters who brought him into a motel room and for like 72 hours had him drinking what those Long Island iced teas,
Yeah.
all alcohol, doing cocaine, and just having a wild bender for 3 days straight, right?
If only any of us could be treated so cruelly. You know what I'm saying? Like poor guy.
Um, Carlos Acevedo wrote an article about it, I think, on Burt Cooper for the now defunct HBO boxing site from like a long, long time ago. And someone made cartoons along with it. And someone made a cartoon of Cooper with the two like, supposed blonde girls. And it's the best thing you see. Like you just see like Cooper with his shirt off in the bed, and you see these two girls like kissing his cheeks, and he's just smiling ahead like
Living the life. Now that is smoking indeed. Fucking A.
so, but and that's also an interesting one in the sense too, because Cooper at that point was managed and trained by Joe Frazier, Foreman's old rival. So for Frazier to see his head pupil and the guy that, best resembled his style go in there and get slapped around by Foreman certainly pissed Frazier off too, I'm sure. And
God, dude. I mean, it's brief aside, did Joe really just every single person that Joe was ever associated with in the boxing ring got shit kicked? Like every James Schuler, his son, like everyone, dude. Poor guys. Just don't associate with Joe Frazier would be the advice. Don't ever do it. God
yeah.
damn. Anyway, but yes, Bert Cooper. I mean, that wasn't even a fight. But, fights Bigfoot Martin, who fought like every single heavyweight champion from like fucking like 1975 to like 1992 or something like that. Like every single one. Fucking crazy. But yeah, dude, from in about a 2-ish year span, George, and this is the kind of thing that you can't do now. And for good reason. Don't get me wrong. Like, fighters should not be fighting 20 times in 2 years. Like that's not good, like that's not good for the brain, not good for the body. They shouldn't be doing it. But point is, it's the kind of thing where if you are quickly trying to hone a fighter, quickly trying to get a fighter ready for like actual fighters in a division, that's what you got to do. That's what Mike Tyson did at the start of his career, fight like 24 times in like 18 months or something like that. That's what you have to do. That's the best way to fucking get yourself ready. And, for all of the weight that Foreman had on, I'm not going to lie, he probably could not have been 255 pounds and training religiously. I'm sure that he was skimping on some shit, but he was definitely training enough that I'll tell you what, dude, those are some of the most diesel looking fucking upper arms on a heavyweight that I've ever seen in my life. Fucking late 80s and early 90s, George Foreman. You could talk shit about titties. You could say he's eating burgers and blah, blah, blah. Look at that fool's arms. Like he's got like the veiniest forearms you've ever seen. And it's like, you imagine that fuck getting hit by that? You kidding me? Fuck that.
Yeah, fuck Hulk Hogan's biceps. Just look at George Foreman. There's a famous, well, I don't
He would have
know,
fucked him up on the grill and in the ring, Hulk. Get the fuck out of here.
there's
Come on,
a there's
brother.
a photos, there's photos and video of a training session of Foreman. He's wearing a pink beanie, and he's wearing a pink beanie and a cut off like sweatshirt, and he's doing the bicep curls. And when you see it, like you just see, bro, like his arms are humongous. And he didn't even really have titties too when you think about it. He was just
Nah,
broad.
yeah,
Like, he
that
wasn't
was just
really.
so exaggerated.
Yeah, I mean, by the late '90s, by the tail end of his career, he definitely, the tone of
Yeah,
anything
when
was
he's like
out there.
50,
But George, yeah, George was peaking by 1989, 1990. Like his in terms of overall, in terms of his sharpness and like where he wanted to be and like shape wise and all that. Even if it didn't quite look it aesthetically, like he was peaking. He was absolutely peaking. So when he fights Jerry Cooney now, that was the fight that everyone was kind of like. It was like the first one of those first joke fights that was going to be on pay-per-view, and everyone was making fun of it. Oh, the geezers at Caesars is what they were calling it, and whatever it may be. And like what's interesting about that fight too is that, Jerry Cooney, who we've discussed millions of times on the show, but his career was such a start and stop after the Holmes fight that he had barely been active. I think his last fight before this one coming up was Michael Spinks, and that happened 3 years, well, it was almost 3 years before that. And so with
and he
him,
didn't. It didn't look so good.
no, not at all. I mean, just his career never recovered after losing to Larry Holmes. His whole life just kind of went into a tailspin. But he felt like this was going to be his last chance. And he thought it would, I guess, would be winnable because of just Foreman being old. But Foreman, again, even though he wasn't fighting top guys, he had been active as fuck, like you said, fighting every, sometimes every 3 weeks or every month or whatever it was from 1987 up until this point. And Gil Clancy decided he was going to work with Cooney for that fight, which was interesting because Foreman initially approached Clancy about training him for his comeback, and Clancy declined. And I'm assuming Clancy said, "Oh, I thought George was old and blah blah blah." But I'm assuming more so too is that the last time Clancy was with him was back in Puerto Rico, and he just had weird memories of that and just didn't want to deal with anything. But he decided to work with Cooney for this fight, and this was again, this is 1990. This is when the public was just like, "Holy shit! I think we got to start taking this guy seriously," because he had two of the most highlight reel KOs of his career during this year. And the first round, Cooney hits him with that fucking left hook, and that's when people were just like, "Oh shit!" Like Foreman gets hit with it, even though Cooney's been rusty. That hook was not really that rusty, and Foreman got hit twice with it. And near the end of the round, you see him do like the stutter step, like he wobbled, and he had to like grab something to grab his hold because Cooney fucking hit him. But Foreman composed himself, came back, and in round two scored one of the most crushing knockouts in history. I mean, it's probably my all-time favorite KO. The way he just the walk-off uppercut, like he's taking out the trash. Doom, 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 doom. And then as Cooney goes down, oh yeah, take this with you. And then like hits him with a, go throwaway right hand.
Even Rusty, that's still a 230 pound, 6'4", 6'5" man, or a 6'5" man who's like, was a good puncher to begin with. And he still had that power, clearly, because yeah, George, he made George do a couple steps there. And on top of that, like I mentioned when we talked the other day, there's the clips from the following day on whatever it was, Letterman or Leno, I don't fucking know. And he's talking on the talk show and shit. And he's talking about how, first of all, his eyes all fucked up. He's all bruised and swollen and stuff like that. And it looks like he barely got hit, but that's all it took. And he's straight up saying, yeah, Jerry Cooney is one of the hardest punchers I've ever taken a punch from, no question. And I believe it. I believe it. But I think that's also why he took Cooney out because he was just like, all right, we ain't doing this. We're not getting into a fucking 9 round thing. Let's end this now. And he did. Poof, man. Yeah. And he didn't knock Cooney out cold, but you could see Cooney's on the canvas and he's just like, what?
Yep.
What do you mean? Like, I mean, Holmes fucked him up, but like that was a protracted battle, and Holmes was pissed because he got hit in the dick real bad. But this was different. This was George Foreman taking no chances and just saying,
Yeah.
"You're excommunicated, bro."
And that was the first glimpse that everyone was just like, oh shit, that looked like 1975 George Foreman, 73 George Foreman, just going out there and obliterating fools. Let's fucking go, baby. And so, at this point, Mike Tyson is still the heavyweight champion, right? Because Tyson was February. Tyson lost it in February to Buster Douglas. So all roads ahead, Foreman still wants to fight Tyson, and had Tyson beating Buster Douglas, chances are, well, after Holyfield, he probably would have fought Foreman. But Tyson obviously loses to Douglas, and now there might be an opening where Tyson and because Douglas now has to fight Holyfield. So I mean, like, there might be an opening for a mega fight between Tyson and Foreman, which Foreman is more than happy to oblige to because that's what he's been angling is to fight Tyson, whatever, besides winning the championship. And so that leads to a double header, the only time this happened between the two of them, and it landed on regular HBO. We all know today this would be like an $80 price tag on pay-per-view, or there we go. That's an iconic cover too, by the way. That's one of the more
Oh
iconic.
yeah, it's great art.
Love that. Yeah. Um, that would be amazing on a t-shirt. But so that ends up becoming a double header, which is monumental in itself again because it's those two like headlining a card together. And also it's one of those rare cards from that time period when Bob Arum and Don King absolutely hated each other, but they worked on a joint, promotion because they knew the money that was involved potentially if everything goes well and what was going to happen. So that's what went down. It was one of those things that like when De La Hoya and Chavez appeared on the same card on HBO, when De La Hoya and Bernard Hopkins appeared on the pay-per-view together, so on and so forth. This was supposed to build to that big fight. So Mike Tyson came back against Henry Tillman and George Foreman fought Adelson Rodriguez, South American heavyweight champ, and at that point, besides getting bludgeoned by Holyfield, a very good fighter.
Yeah, and a respected fighter overall. And usually he was ranked for a few years. So it's not like he was just some random guy. And he didn't have like a ton of like signature wins, but he had defeated enough contenders that, again, he was ranked in the top 10 for like, I want to say like 2 years straight or something. But, you get leveled by Holyfield. It's not the biggest problem in the world. It's a problem for your brain. But in terms of convincing people that you're still a good fighter, you're still in good shape. But yeah, you put him in with George Foreman. Poor guy, Magilla, dude. He got absolutely flattened on that evening as well. It was still a hard sell because they were trying to push Foreman toward the heavyweight title, but people were still kind of like, all right, so he knocked out Cooney, but like that's not enough to convince us. Like he's not really going through this list of contenders, and the division was in a very transitional period, top heavy, not a ton of great contenders on the lower end of the top 15, top 10. And so, yeah, dude, it was a tough sell to convince people that he deserved a shot at the heavyweight championship. However, again, Rodriguez, despite 3 losses, was ranked at the time, and Holyfield just fucking murked him, flattened him. And unfortunately, Rodriguez, when he got murked, he got really murked, bro. He was like out skis. And so Tillman also, that was a big revenge plot for Mike Tyson. It was not only his first fight back, but Tillman had kept him out of the Olympics by defeating him twice. And Mike Tyson got his lick back by defeating Tillman and, you know, defeating him quickly. Wasn't like super impressive because Tillman he wasn't a big heavyweight, and he didn't have the most impressive pro career. So it was more just about Mike Tyson getting back from his loss than anything. But it did seem to kind of set up that Tyson Foreman fight. It was just that there was too much chaos in Tyson's future for any of that to really get cemented.
Also, too, it has to be noted that Don King initially was very excited about making Tyson Foreman because he figured that would be an easy payday for Tyson and that would bring in command a lot of money. And Foreman was at the peak of his popularity as well during this time period because he had a there but during his ring walk when he was walking to the ring for Rodriguez. You hear Jim Lampley tell Sugar Ray Leonard he said that Foreman was voted the most popular fighter in the world at that moment, like I guess in some various thing. He said number two, you Ray. He was like, sorry about that. And Ray's like, it's okay. Like it's whatever. But it would have been a massive event, but Don King also knew that he didn't want Tyson to lose again. And I think what he saw that night with Foreman effortlessly knocking the shit out of Rodriguez, it spooked him. It absolutely did. And he knew the type of, place that Tyson was in at that point and the chaos that was going outside of his life. And the last thing he needed was to go in there with a guy who was peaking like Foreman was in 1990 and would have been salivating at the bit to fight someone like Tyson. It wouldn't have ended well. In my opinion, and I think we've talked about this, and I think you feel the same way, Tyson would have got absolutely thrashed in that fight.
It's not a good style for him, dude.
Yeah, it would have been bad.
Yeah,
And
it's not a
Foreman knew
good
that
style
too.
for him. And if Foreman would have been like more fragile, didn't have a very good chin, we'd be in business. But as tough as he was, especially in his second career,
Yeah.
nah, man,
As we soon come to find out,
that would have
because
been hell for Tyson.
as we soon come to find out, because the Tyson fight falls through, obviously. But then Foreman eventually ends up getting a big major. He gets to the title fight. He ends up fighting Evander Holyfield in 1991. And this is the first time, like, major pay-per-view TV KO and all this stuff, like, it commanded a huge price. This was a massive, massive event. And also, thank God, the last time Donald Trump was really involved with boxing like that,
And
because,
and also, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
oh,
but
please.
extremely relevant for political reasons because he's using the exact same tactic right now as president that he
What, the war
used
clause?
for this fucking fight. Yes, the fucking war clause, bro. It's like the fucking rarely used and rarely seen in terms of like contractual legality cases and shit. And he's enforced it in both fucking instances. That's amazing. In terms of tactics, it's brilliant. I'm not gonna lie to you. But my God. I
That's like
wanted,
he's
sorry,
using.
I talked to Kathy Duva about this years ago because I was, before he got elected the first time, I was going to do a story on it and I just kind of gave it up because I realized that it was just going to be fucking like, a drop in a bucket and nobody was going to give a fuck. But she talked at length about of the setup a lot of this fight because Holyfield was with main events and she directly handled a lot of the business for main events at that time.
Okay. Oh, I have talked not talked, but I've read about her comments about that fight. And she said the same thing that she was like pissed everyone was because he used that type of thing, I guess, to say he couldn't pay as much as he wanted for the fee for the fight or whatever it
Yep.
was to get it there. Yeah,
Yep.
absolute
To
bullshit.
weasel out of the fucking payment like he's done for like everything.
Because he knew it was like, well, this is a massive event. It was, but all that being said, the fight, which initially the public was viewing generally as a kind of a mismatch, they still thought that like Foreman was going to get beat up in this fight and then he would retire. But it was like the curiosity of actually seeing him compete for it, the fact that he built himself back up to get to this point. But then, Foreman defies everybody by fighting his ass off. I mean, it was. He lost clearly. It wasn't like really close or anything, but like he fought his ass off in that fight and like more than once rocked Holyfield around. Round seven, especially. That's the most memorable one of the fight, I want to say.
Yeah, it was like back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the beginning of it, um, there's two distinct broadcasts. There's the one that has the TVKO one with Joe Goosen and I forgot his announcing partner for it. And then there's the HBO broadcast. And then the HBO, like the HBO delayed broadcast, the HBO broadcast, Lampley was like, "Oh, I think Holyfield just tripped his Philly over there. I don't think he was really hurt." Remember when Foreman clubbed him? You see Holyfield did like a slight skid.
Yeah.
Was he off balance a little bit? Yeah. Was it because Foreman actually clubbed the shit out of him and that was just the force of a blow? Yes. And Holyfield was not a huge guy at that point. Well, never was in general, but I mean, he got rocked. And like, if you hear the TVKO announcers and Foreman hits him like that, you hear them go, "Oh, was he hurt? Maybe a little off balance, but Foreman caught him." And then next thing you know, Foreman's like caught him again. Boom, boom. And Holyfield was hurt because he had to like readjust there. He's like, "Oh shit, here we go."
Exactly. His reaction shows you that he was hurt because he was
Yeah,
immediately like, "Oh shit," because Holyfield had that dog, bro. You hit him and he had to come back, and
he
that's
did.
exactly what he did.
But he took him a second too. Like he took some combinations there and he got rocked around. You could see he was like, okay, I gotta, weather this for a second because like, fuck. But once he did, it was the combination of the left hook. It was the left hook and the right hook. Because Foreman had his guard up like that, and Holyfield came in, boom, and then boom, 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 and then Foreman started rocking, and it just went back and forth. And Holyfield, gave him all the credit in the world afterwards. He was like, no, no, man, when anyone wants to say, oh, you went the distance with him, blah, 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 he was like, get in there with George. Like, this is a bad motherfucker. He still hits us harder than anybody on the planet. He's durable as hell. Like, he's legit.
He had to
And
work his ass off, dude.
he really did. But that was also at that point, that was the end of Foreman's career in terms of being active. Once he got that Holyfield fight, now he was like a star. You know what I mean? HBO picked him up as one of their announcers. He's even bigger now than he was before. The video games now are coming out. The relevancy with like, the commercials all the time, doing and making cameo appearances and all this other stuff. Like Foreman was a phenomenon. He was as big on terms of television as any other star during that time period.
Dude, the way that ratings are expressed on like with TV execs and shit, it's fucking cuckoo. So it's like it's expressed in weird percentages and shit like that. But when you talk about TV shares, they usually say when they mention stuff like that, they're talking about the percentage of people who have a television on
Mhm.
that are watching that thing. And according to like their analytics, it was an 8.8% buy rate share in 1991 for this fight, which has never been seen before or since.
That's insane.
Like that's nuts. And then that it made so much money and did so well that, like you said, like it was the end of Foreman didn't need to be he didn't need to be active anymore. He made millions of dollars again, and he got tons of endorsements. And then on top of that, the gate was massive. It also helped cement TVKO and in HBO pay per view as a major factor and force when closed circuit was still kind of like, fiddling around there, still trying to figure out what to do with the whole pay per view thing. And this was the way forward. this helped show them the way forward, both for better and worse. And this is exactly what led to TVKO, pay per view, and all the black boxes of the 1990s and the kind of restricted access of a lot of that shit. But like you said, also, it really proved that Foreman was not a joke, that he was here, that he was there as not only a force in the ring, but a massive attraction.
Totally. And he, from there, I mean, the only time after that, and in terms of his career, in terms of like before he regained the heavyweight championship, the only scrub you want to call it that he ended up fighting was Jimmy Ellis. And I think after that fight, that's when HBO kind of put their foot down with him too and gave him like a talk like, listen, bro, we'll air your fights because, you're popular as shit and we love you over here and all that, but like, you gotta do something. And because I mean, Jimmy Ellis, well, I'm not even gonna say Jimmy Ellis was a good fighter. He really wasn't. He had like a fluke knockout that I'm not even sure if it was like on the up and up about with Tony Tubbs, and it's really just about it. But well, actually, well, speaking of, I mean, I'm wearing the sweatshirt from the fight, as you can see right there. But that's about the most notable thing. I mean, he fights Pierre Coetzer soon after, and also the Alex Stewart fight. And that's the one that initially, before George got to Michael Moore, this was the one that like had the public outcry and saying, "You need to retire, George. We don't need to see this anymore. It's like getting bad." Because
Exactly.
George now we have to admit he had regressed already.
And
By the time he
at that
fought,
point, Holyfield was his shot. That was his shot. And people are like, all right, you got your chance. Now skedaddle.
sure. And at this point too, think about it. Holyfield and Riddick Bowe were the beginning stages of, killing each other in the ring and just ruining each other's careers. Um, Michael Moore was getting ready to fight Holyfield for the championship after he had regained it. Lennox Lewis was on the come up, but he was about to lose to Oliver McCall.
Yeah, he was doing
But
his own thing, had his own
exactly,
struggles.
and Foreman wasn't dealing with Don King and all that going on. So I mean, it was just like there was kind of an open field. But when he fights Alex Stewart, that was a fight that like Alex Stewart was almost used at one point kind of like Mercado Mayorga was in terms of like the comeback opponent, right? Like, remember how all the welterweights and junior middleweights were like, oh, I'm going to use Mayorga as my comeback guy. And like, after like a major loss and it's a high profile fight, I'll beat him up and whatever. It'll be a good win on my
Yeah,
record.
he'll put in a good effort. He might land some good shots, and that's it.
Yeah. Or I might just bludgeon him. Like, Holyfield beat him on the way up before he got to the championship in a good fight. Tyson destroyed him in like one round. Michael Moore on the come up beat him. You know what I mean? Like, there was guy, that's what he was being used for. Sorry, I'm losing my voice over here again. But then when he fights Foreman, initially that's what it looks like is happening there too. He gets dropped early on, and Stewart, who was always kind of slow and cumbersome, was just, I don't know, it looked like it was going to be another early Foreman knockout. But then slowly, Stewart started gaining his confidence. That's one thing he always kind of struggled with. And once he started gaining his confidence, he started landing on Foreman and realizing that Foreman was slowing down and he was getting success and he was getting more success. And then his confidence built from there. And if there's one thing Alex Stewart could always do is that he was a massive puncher. Like, even if his record was a little puffed up, those were legitimate knockouts. He was knocking the shit out of a lot of guys back then. He was a vicious puncher in the early 90s.
Yeah, I mean,
And
he went at it with Moore. Yeah,
he did. Oh, that was a great fight. And I wish he could have. And he went at it initially in the first fight with Holyfield too. He landed some good shots and bloodied Holyfield up. But in the Foreman fight, it was like, you're not going to jump George Foreman down. And we realized he had a massive chin because like he was taking absolute bombs. But that was the worst part of
oh
it.
yeah,
He
he
was
was
getting.
getting his head like knocked the fuck around in some of those rounds. Yeah,
And if it wasn't for his name, it could have been a different dude. Either the fight would have got stopped just by the damage done, or he would have lost the decision because Stewart probably got jobbed in that fight. It was close, but I mean, like Alex didn't, besides the initial early rounds, he really put in that work. And Foreman looked horrible after that, man. Like, I mean, before he put the sunglasses on, you just saw he was so disfigured and bloodied and everything, and like it was awful. And that became like a famous photo that was being run in all the magazines and all these different things, usually with an open letter by the editor. Open letter, George, please retire for the sake of boxing. George, please do
yeah,
this, blah blah blah.
sanctimonious fucking bullshit.
Yeah, that they've done for everybody else. Time for you to retire. The boxing fans calling for this. You know what I mean? Like all this shit. And it didn't help matters that like he beats Pierre Coetzer in his next fight. And poor Pierre Coetzer, who went through those fucking 6 months of hell, when he had the fight. Frank
He had like
Bruno,
the worst run of fucking heavyweight in modern history.
Bo, Frank Bruno, and George Foreman. Three of the most absolute bruisers of that time. And he was thrown in like 2 months apart from each one of them. So yeah. Um, but then the Tommy Morrison fight, he loses to Tommy Morrison in that fight. And he looks like shit in it too. Like you shouldn't be getting having Tommy Morrison of all people run around and outbox you and out hustle you and all that stuff. Like Morrison
Yeah,
wasn't a
you're making Morrison look like he's fucking Spider Rico in there, bro. You're making Morrison he's fucking running game on you.
Yeah, bro. He just had him darting in and out and bouncing around, and like the fight's not fun to watch. They play it sometimes on Tubi and stuff, but Foreman looked really bad. Like from how he looked in 1990 to 3 years later was a stark difference. He looked very, very old at this point. Now he's 44 years old, and everyone's like, okay, enough is enough now. He's not fighting actively. He looks like shit anytime he does. Tommy Morrison, like you said, is just running circles around him. And what else is there to do? Like this is.
And he already
But
had a job, he's already commentating and like what is,
But when the Michael Moore fight happens, and this is the thing about, like we said, about the openness of that division that time, is that a lot of there was just it was open. Like he was just there. Like Michael Moore didn't really have an open guy that'd be like, yo, I want to fight you for the championship. Holyfield had retired initially because of the heart ailment thing. And then he was gonna come back and, like I said, go back at it with Bo. Tyson
Tyson's
was
still in prison, yeah.
Tyson's still in prison. Lennox Lewis had just lost to Oliver McCall. And the biggest name out there for what you would think is the easiest money is George Foreman. Even though Foreman had no business getting that title fight because his previous fight, which was a year ago, and he had lost it to Tommy Morrison, he still had a big enough name. And so he called Bob Arum and was like, yo, I want to fight him. And doesn't take much for the fucking convincing the sanctioning bodies to be like, yeah, we'll do it, whatever. And there you go.
And you and I also were talking about this shit the other night, dude. Teddy Atlas. You don't even know how close you came to losing your life, bro. You don't even know. You were within an inch of your life. I don't know. I don't know what it was like because they might have said something in the Legendary Nights, but I don't remember. I just know that Teddy
I showed a
Atlas
clip
was.
of it.
Well, I remember them showing the clip, but I don't know what like led to it. Like I don't know what happened or
Oh,
what he like. What the fuck was Teddy's? What are you
I
thinking?
still don't know what set that off because
Yeah, what
Foreman
the
was
fuck are you
never
thinking,
talked shit about anybody. He was the most calm,
bro?
nicest
You
person.
you got like a 3 foot scar on your face, and most motherfuckers when they get a 3 foot scar from a street fight, they learn.
Hmm?
That's their lesson. He never learned it. This fool's up here getting in George Foreman's face, and George Foreman's just laughing and was like, "Who is this little man? Who's this little guy?"
And Teddy is snapping on him over and over and over. And Michael Moore, who was always known as the hostile one and like cursing out media and other stuff and just being a general grump, is the one that's holding Teddy back and was like, relax, relax, like calm down.
And
And
doing
Teddy's
it
like,
in a like
no.
get like in his like doing it
Yeah.
like he's about to hit him like type of shit. The type of shit where like if you're around the way, somebody's getting fucked up or shot or stabbed or something if you're doing that.
Foreman is just sitting there holding his hand clasped like that. And you can tell he's annoyed, but he's cool. And he's like, sit down and make me a sandwich. That's what he says. Go get me a sandwich and be quiet.
Yeah, and he's like giggling and shit while he's saying it. It's like, and you're just, I watching that. I'm just thinking like George is about to snap and kill you. You don't even know.
He changed the world that night, I just that was he was getting his ass kicked that entire fight. It was no like, the only nostalgic value was that somehow he squeezed into the trunks he had fought Muhammad Ali in 20 years earlier. But like he was getting plotted around, whatever. But at the same time, there were pockets of times where he was having a little bit of success because Moore was stupid and would stand in front of George and like admire his work once in a while because he thought he was working on a heavy bag, which he was, but you can't fucking hit a heavy bag who still has the power that George Foreman did. Even if it's slow, he's slick enough in there to know how to place his blows that he's going to land something if you stand there long enough for him to allow him to do it. And Moore would do it in certain pockets. He would stand there and boom, boom, and Foreman would hit him. And then, like, Moore would start moving again, but he was also moving on the wrong side. He was always moving constantly to his right, wasn't he? Or something. He was moving into the direction of Foreman's power.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was moving to his left and into Foreman's right hand is the
Yeah,
problem.
yeah.
And he kept Well, he was changing direction, but he kept circling into it. and he was doing the wrong thing. Like, and Teddy was telling him in the corner, and it's not like he made Teddy a genius. Teddy was just saying, like, dude, he's lining you up for the right hand. That's what he's trying to do because he can't get you with the left, which is not true because the left hook is a fantastic weapon against a southpaw. It's just that, most guys are afraid to use it because of the jab hands right there. But George didn't even try. He was just lining him up for the right hand the entire time. And Teddy's like, he's lining you up for the right hand, and you keep walking right into it and giving it to him. Stop giving it to him and go the other fucking way. So that way, at least if you get hit with a jab, you can fucking skirt around.
Mhm.
And Teddy told it to. I think it was like 2 rounds before in the corner. He told him exactly what he was doing and what he was going to do. Moore just didn't listen, and he was probably tired too. But still.
Yeah, it was. By round 10, that's when I remember even watching it when I'm watching it live. I'll never forget it because that was the day that I've told this story before. I was watching it with my dad, and I think we had family over. My aunt wanted to go home, and she only lived around the block. But my dad, instead of telling her, "Hey man, just give me like 2 more rounds," he figured Foreman was gonna lose, so he just left, and then he ended up missing it. And then I ran outside freaking the fuck out and screaming and yelling, and he was like, "What happened?" I told him, and then he lost his mind and called her up and started cursing her out. That was just one of my favorite memories ever, and I ended up changing my life because I fell in love with the sport after that. But I just watching it around 10, like you said, Teddy has told him he was like, bro, but he wasn't like exasperating it too. Like remember I was screaming at him during the Holyfield
We're
fight and
firemen. He wasn't doing that shit. He was just like,
like
hey,
sitting on the bench anyways while he should allow his guy to sit there. You want me to do this? You want me to do this? Bro, let him sit on the fucking bench. What is wrong with you? But he was being more calm. He was just like, yo, man, he was like, I like what you're doing, but you're not gonna have a friendly corner if you keep on not listening to me. He was like, he's trying to line you up. Like he's old, but he's dangerous. And if you watch the Legendary Nights, Michael Spinks, he was only on it briefly, blinking you miss him. But they interview him briefly for this because obviously he's the first light heavyweight champion to move up to become heavyweight champ. And all he says is you hear him go, I love this quote. He goes, I can't believe he was being so courageous. He goes, standing in front of a big man like that. And then he sucks his teeth. He goes, and starts shaking his head. And then it goes to another part, like, because he knew he was just like, bro, like, what was you thinking? He was like,
yeah.
I can't believe he
They
was
should have
thinking.
interspersed that with a clip of him doing his shit against Holmes in the first fight, just like jab, 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 jab.
Yeah, running around like a maniac. But he was totally right. He was like, I have no idea why that man was being so courageous standing in front of someone so fucking big like that. Like, bro, what are you doing? You got speed. Move on him. But round 10, and Foreman was also, that's when Foreman started using his left hook too. And that also one thing he did that was really smart is that he was so strong too, he could grab you and push you into position of where he wanted you to. And he was grabbing more and kind of like hooking him, like throwing these slapping hooks to his body, but it was enough to move him to the position of his right hand where he was trying to land it. And like you said, Mora was slowing down because he had to push the pace in the fight. And he gets pushed him a couple of times, and then he lands a left hook, and then he throws like two more. But then that first combination, bink, bink, that just looks slow and plodding like it had nothing on it. But obviously it did because Mora's out on his feet. And then the
Yeah,
second
he
one,
kind of stopped. And you don't see it from that angle because it's a bad angle in the live shot, but you see it on the replay
yeah,
because it's the back of his head. But then you see that first right hand lands, and Moore's kind of like, oh shit.
he does. He takes two like mini bunny hops. He's like, and then he just stands there, like still like, and then Foreman, bink, bink, and then he just,
Even to this day, if I post shit about that fight, people go fake, fake fight, fake knockout, fix, and I'm like, are you fucking stupid? Who the fuck? What the fuck are you talking about? Have you
yeah,
ever
those were
fucking
blood
seen a
capsules
George
in his
Foreman
mouth.
fight?
Those were blood capsules in his mouth, like wrestling.
The fuck are you talking? Yeah, well, that just goes to show you they'll say anything, bro. They're the most stupid people alive are given social media these days,
He was
unfortunately.
out,
That
absolutely
fool was
out.
cooked. Yeah, dude, that shit landed clean right through his guard. What do you want me to say? It was
And
slow,
when
but
you
it
see
hit.
that, when you see that blood curdle up in his mouth after it too, like that's as legitimate as it gets, man. But not you got to give Lance credit. He's the one that ends up saying that line that happened,
I'll give it to him.
whatever, of course. But after, what adds to it though, I think besides that line is
Yeah, it was the
what
timing.
immediately it was the timing of it. It's the timing of him doing that because Foreman immediately after he says it happened. Foreman looks up to the sky and then drops to his knees. Like it was that perfect timing.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
remember that shit.
yeah,
Yeah.
we all did. Like it was. one of the most gut-wrenching, like, holy shit, oh my God, I just witnessed this on television. I can't
I
believe
don't
what I saw.
I don't know why it timed out this way, but right around the late 80s and early 90s, a number of these big fights happened like within a week or two of my birthday. I don't know why, but like a bunch of the heavyweight fights. I don't know why, but they did. And this was one of them. It was like a couple weeks before my birthday. And I remember that shit. And I was just like, holy shit. I didn't grasp the impact of it at the time, but still, like, I knew who George Foreman was. And it was like, oh, whoa, because Michael Moore was the man. He beat Holyfield's ass. Well, in a way, he outworked him in the second fight, but he showed he was clearly a badass, and so that was crazy. That seeing that entire succession, Mike Tyson, and then into anyway, it was wild, dude. Definitely
Oh,
one of the wildest sports moments ever.
totally. It was just amazing to witness, and we all felt it. And the to see everyone's genuine reaction from it, from Gil Clancy probably getting told to shut up in the production because he was like, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. And then he suddenly cuts off randomly out of the middle of that, to Larry Merchant having a great comment where he said, Foreman was only whatever to one underdog. He was like, but I found her to be a gazillion to one. To win, he was like, to win this, he was like, this is a remarkable achievement. This has to stand on its own, blah, 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 blah. Like he was really putting it into perspective. And it was a beautiful moment. So everyone was all like, back up on Foreman again, right? All the magazines have talked about retrospectives about his life and his career and all this other shit, and everybody wants Foreman, and it's absolutely insane. It was during this time, around this time too, when he gets that grill deal. And the grill deal, well, I mean, that's just set him up for.
Knock out the fat.
That was a great grill, man. I definitely had one growing up. We all did. I was still
I
bummed
thought
out.
I still had mine, but I don't. I thought I did, but I must have broken because there's no way I would have gotten rid of it otherwise.
Someone said the other day, had me crack up. He said the George Foreman grill walked so the air fryer could fly.
Straight up though, bro. That shit was the shit, bro. I love that shit. We used to be grilling inside in my motherfucking kitchen, not giving a fuck. It was great.
And I guarantee you, if Hulk Hogan, supposedly the man that was going to get the deal first, if you listen to him and his stupid ass talk about it, was behind the whole thing, there's no way that shit would have been as popular. Hulk Hogan grills, let me tell you something, brother. With this lean, mean, blah blah blah. Like Foreman was just charming. For Hogan wasn't charming. Hogan was a fucking stupid idiot that just had
He was
catchphrase.
perfect for that info. I remember the infomercial. He was
Yeah.
perfect for it. Perfect. Just smiled and just grinned and was just like, "This is the shit. Buy it."
And he said he
It
knew
was
how to
great.
work crowds because he said being a decade doing preaching and all that
I was
taught him
just
how to
about
work
to say, yeah, he's
crowds.
a fool's a preacher. That's what you're doing, bro. You're a used car salesman
hmm And then he
selling
was going
Sky
around.
Daddy.
And so he branched over both sides. I mean, like the sporting world of being the heavyweight champion, and then also like everybody's grandma and mom will know, oh, the George Foreman, I saw his infomercial. He's so sweet. Like everybody just,
You said it the other day, and it's not even an exaggeration at all.
oh yeah,
At all. When there will be people where I'd say some shit about George Foreman and they'd go the grill guy, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? The grill guy? But that's I'm not mad at it. It's just like, what? Nah, he's the boxing guy. But to so many people now, he's the fucking grill guy because that's how, dude. He made like tens of millions of dollars on that, like $100 million or something. Like he made
totally.
something crazy off that shit.
My friends who are bartenders at my local spot in my neighborhood, when you told me the news, and I was like sitting there kind of sad and stuff like that, and they were like, "Oh, who passed away?" And I said George Foreman, and that was like the fighter, and they were like, "Wait." They were like, "Did he make?" They're like the grill guy, right? And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "He was a fighter?" And I was like, "He was." And I'm like, and I mean, they're like, "Wow!"
I
And I'm
gotta
like, "Hold
blame
on."
you, but god damn it, come on.
I'm like, "Let me show you a clip." And I showed them the Cooney clip, and they were just like, and bro, when you see their eyes like almost pop out of their head like a fucking cartoon, they're like, "That's him?" You know.
He knocked out the fat that night. God damn.
Sure. Because essentially, the Mora fight was like more or less the end of his career as terms of like big things. There was so many rumors going on after that. We don't even have to
Yeah,
cover
he
them.
didn't look good after that. He
He
never
didn't,
looked good after
and
that.
he didn't have to either. But I mean, that was it was just Foreman. But there was a lot of rumors of different fights at this point. Tyson had come back, so people wanted to see Tyson. That, but and others. But Foreman immediately dropped the belts, and everything became splintered again after he won the belt. after he beat
Yeah,
Moore.
he wasn't interested in fucking defending against such and such mandatory from fucking, some random
But the
organization. He
WBA
didn't give a
wanted him to
fuck.
fight Tony Tucker, who was like a perennial top contender
Yeah,
for
he
whatever
didn't
people
give a fuck
thought the
about
guy
any of
did.
that shit.
He didn't fight Tony Tucker, so that got taken away. Bruce Seldon, he wasn't going to fight Bruce Seldon, that's for goddamn sure. And he wanted, the easy for the least money or whatever. And Cedric told me that. Like he knew what he was doing. Cedric paid off the IBF to make sure that he was able to get um, Axel Schultz rated enough that he can get a title fight. They thought it would be easy work, and then that became a fiasco in itself when Schultz beat the hell out of him. And then all the articles against started coming up. George, please retire for your safety for the boxing fans. Blah blah blah. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, and then
But
all of a sudden Axel Schultz started getting a bunch of magazine features because they were like, "Oh, Axel Schultz beat up George Foreman," but
and
that was short lived too.
you got two other title fights out of there. You got a full on career off of that thing.
Straight up.
Yeah, poor Schultz because he should have won that fight definitely, and he should have beat Franz Botha. At one point, he should have been IBF champion, even if he wasn't going to lose. Michael Moore was finally the one who like convincingly beat him. And you're like, all right, enough is this guy. But like, he got some good paydays out of that. But I mean, there was that one. There was the fiasco with Crawford Grimsley in Tokyo, which Tommy Morrison came back under when first time under HIV positive, and then yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, especially because fucking uh the like Crawford Grimsley, I want to say he was on. Damn, now I got to look. Was he undefeated? Yeah, he was undefeated, but he
Mhm.
was like one of those dudes who was kind of like he was featured on a handful of cards and had been seen a few times, and so they're like, oh, he's this undefeated heavyweight, but was not
He
particularly
just had
good.
an interesting name, and he was a blonde haired white guy that couldn't really fight. He's
And
just
it was the kind of thing where going the distance with him was not a good sign.
not at all. Considering he got knocked out in like 7 seconds by Jimmy Thunder.
Yeah, who
So
was not even a big puncher, but just fucking like thwacked his ass. At least not on that level. It was
yeah,
not was not a puncher in any of his bigger fights.
exactly. Um, and then the fight with Lou Savarese, which he actually did look pretty good in that one, considering his age and all that. I'll give him
Yeah.
that. And then the Shannon Briggs fight. But I mean, that was his career, right? The Briggs one is one again. Had he beat Shannon Briggs, it's probably best maybe he lost that decision because I don't know. He probably would have continued after that, at least had another fight or something. But
But
you
just a
know,
string of really weird fights. If you look at all of every single one of the fights we've mentioned since Tommy Morrison, just a strange, like a weird occurrence or a weird decision or you know what I'm saying? Like everything, there's something weird about every one of those fights.
yeah, but I'll give him credit though because the whole world was in uproar by the Briggs decision, as they should have been. Briggs lost that fight. I don't give a fuck that he rallied near the end or whatever. Foreman beat him up and beat him up convincingly. But that being said, Foreman was the most content one. Everyone else was up in arms, and Foreman was like, "Yeah, don't worry about it. It's all good. I'm not mad. Everything is cool." And he was, yeah, as he should have been, like you said. By this time, the grill is taken off, and he's been multi-millionaire off of that. The endorsements he does for commercials and everything, and plus the HBO gig, which is
Yeah.
the stuff that we both love because, like, Foreman was really insightful when it came to it. Like, in terms of former fighters that become announcers, Foreman for myself was one of the better ones because he just had something to say about everything and like really technical things and all that. Sometimes it was off the wall and you weren't really sure where he was going with it, but like a lot of the time, sometimes it really made sense and you were like, all right, like, I get it. But I don't know, I loved him for that.
No, no question, dude. He was definitely one of the, even if just for the comic relief and the comic value
Yeah.
of the shit that he said and him being part of the broadcast, he was definitely one of the better parts of the broadcast. And especially because toward the end of his tenure when he was there, um, you could just tell that, first of all, Merchant was like, he was like hating life, dude. I don't even know why he was still doing that shit by the end. And Lampley started taking himself like extremely seriously and was always trying to deliver the perfect fucking call and was just like, these two fighters, blah, blah, was always trying to have some poetic fucking bullshit that he was doing. And so, at the very least, George Foreman provided like some chaos. He provided like anything might fucking happen or any, he might say some crazy shit. He might tell randomly in the middle of a fight say that the fight needs to be stopped right now because somebody's about to die. He might just
You
fucking
said Holyfield was going to end up in a pine box. Remember that during the
yeah,
third.
dude, he would just say crazy shit where you'd be like, George, shut up, dude. And every so often, Larry would have to be like, George, now would you stop it? Shit like that. So adding that added element to the broadcast was actually good. It was funny. It was fucking. He had a ton of really memorable calls. Even like I said, even just because they were hilarious and he said funny shit. So
And he
he
wasn't afraid to call out some of the guys on their bullshit. For instance, Lampley had that atrocious call about Allah spelled Barrera or something like that. Remember during the Hamed Barrera fight?
Which
And
which even just maybe 18 months later would have fucking read entirely differently in the US and in New York especially.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Looking back, and Foreman rightfully called him out on that. Remember, right when he said it, he was like, "I don't need to talk about his religion and da da da." And he said something about like, "I don't think you like him" or something. And he was like, he called him out on it, and rightfully so. Basically, he checked him, and Lampley tried to get defensive about it, but like Foreman was like, no, he was like, you shouldn't be saying that. Like, there's some things you don't need to like call him out on his religion. Like, what the fuck? And
Yeah, they were trying to have some little funny time fucking capping on him. Yeah.
yeah, Foreman's like, you don't need to go on that. And the other time too, something that was like really memorable with him, and we can move on to Bramble now. Finally, would be like is when he says during the riot, the first riot, the HBO, the
Galata Bo, yeah.
Auto
Bo
Bowl riot.
Galata, whatever, yeah.
Yeah. And not only has Lampley said this, and my boss Bob Canobio and everyone else that was like involved around ringside, you can hear it on the broadcast. Foreman going, going, don't do that, son. Don't do that. Don't do that. Like, stay away, son. Like, you don't want to do that. Blah, blah, blah. And come to find out, there was people coming around the announcers trying to get a little, funky over there and trying to push through and break through and do whatever. And Foreman protected them all. Foreman, they said, was over there with his arms crossed and is basically telling these guys, you don't want to do that. Don't do that. Like, stay away from over here. What the fuck were they going to do? And they said that no one actually, a few times people made approaches, and when Foreman looked them down and said, don't do that, they went in a different direction because at that point, even when you're rioting and all stuff going on, do you really want to test George Foreman?
And
There's a
and
thousand other people around you can go fight with. George Foreman is the worst one on the last one on the fucking planet and the last one in that arena you want to try to throw hands with.
and even Lampley says right at the end of that broadcast as he's signing off, he says, "My son and my daughter are somewhere here in the arena, and I got to go find them." Which and not to, I'm not going to get into it, but they're both disabled too. So it was like, when you think about that. Anyway, back to the whole Foreman thing. He clearly was, to some degree, a hero on that evening, an evening of absolute fucking madness and chaos, which was just a powder keg in that fucking joint that night. Jesus Christ. I mean, it was a powder keg with Bo's team no matter what, wherever it was. But then you add the added extra element of a bunch of dudes, rooting for a guy who's their ethnicity or nationality, and that shit was ugly as fuck.
Oh, it
And
was
yeah,
so bad that night. And then come to find out, like the chief of police was home, and he finds out there's a riot at the Garden because he turned on the news and saw it. Like no,
fucking wild, bro.
it encapsulates how fucking bad New York is in general and how stupid they are and just underqualified for everything. Like there was no reason that we should have just sat there for 20 minutes watching a fucking riot unfold the way it did with like no security whatsoever. People got seriously hurt that
Oh
night.
yeah,
You
dude, dude, there was like waves of people attacking waves of other. It was like fucking madness, bro. That shit was
you
Lord
would
of the
see some
Flies in
people
that
get
bitch.
fucking clocked. There was one dude standing on the apron on the edge of the ring, just minding his business. He got into someone, and someone you see sucker punch him, pow, and he just goes flying. Then he gets pounced. Another person over there,
Yeah,
you see
there's
with a chair, like it
yeah,
was.
when they zoom out, there's like a fool who's just flinging the metal chairs and shit. It's like Jesus Christ, fuck.
I mean, absolutely insanity. And then there was one other Foreman commentating thing I remember one time that had me cracking up as a kid just because it was so out of the fucking loop was they were talking about pound for pound fighters like during the actual fight and Lamp was like, oh, there's De La Hoya and there's this one and blah, 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 and just giving random guys George. So he was like, who's the top of your list? And George goes, I like that page fella. Or something like that. And like Lampley like audibly like stays quiet for like a half a second because you could clearly like think that he's like
He's
he was
like,
taking
wait, James
yeah
Page, Greg Page, where are we going here?
he was like I like that page fella the welterweight and then Lampley like pauses for a second because I mean that's a fucking out there answer. No one had James Page in their top 10 pound for pound in the league ever. I don't know, top 20 not doing anything. He was a fun welterweight, but I mean what? And and he certainly wasn't an HBO fighter, so you just hear that happen and Lampley just gets quiet for a second because I think he was just kind of like flabbergasted.
Yeah, he's like waiting for him to laugh or something. He's like,
Yeah, and then he goes, "Oh, WBA welterweight champion James Page. Okay, Larry."
Larry, you got something more realistic?
Yeah, like he just uh,
Amazing.
but I'm gonna miss him. I didn't know George personally. I saw him at the Hall of Fame the year he got inducted. I didn't get a chance to roll up on him or talk to him or nothing like that. He was only there for like a day. I think he had an HBO engagement or something. He showed up afterwards, but he's gonna be missed. It wasn't just a boxing person, he was just a wonderful human that made an incredible transformation in life and became a hero to millions.
There were definitely some complications in the last few years. I'm one of those people who does not think that, like, if somebody dies, then you need to automatically say everything nice and nothing bad.
Sure.
That
Sure.
being said, I'm not here to fucking talk shit either. I'm not here to do any of that kind of stuff. I'll simply say that there were definitely some complications in the last few years, and he was accused of doing some stuff in his younger years that I'm always going to say you should listen to people who are making claims and whatnot. That being said, I do think that he was. Look, there's complexities about all the legacies of every bigger great fighter to varying degrees, and that's not to make excuses or justify. Muhammad Ali for several years said black people and white people shouldn't be mixed, shouldn't be in relationships. You know what I mean? He obviously denounced that in his later years, like over and over and over and over and over again. That being said, there are bad things again to varying degrees that a lot of these characters have done. I'm not here to judge that, and I'm not here to take inventory of that. I'm just here to say that I will miss the dude. I definitely miss his commentating. I'll miss him as a fighter. I miss his impact and his legacy, and I hope that we're able to just bring recognition and acknowledgement to that, like we do to everybody that we try to talk about like this. And so, yeah, he'll be a missed dude.
Couldn't have said it better myself. He was just, yeah, a wonderful person, you know what I mean? Everyone that, for the most part, like you said, there are definitely like closets and everything like that, but generally, just his whole presence in life of what he meant to me and every aspect of like how I grew up with him and
The
just have,
vast
yeah,
majority of people had great things to say about him.
there we go. Rest in peace, George. And yeah, Livingstone Bramble. Um, yeah, I feel, it always sucks when like people, like famous people end up passing away like right next to each other because someone always kind of gets eclipsed from the bigger star of the other one that you kind of feel like, you wish that they would get more recognition. But Livingstone Bramble was one of those guys that not only was he a hell of a fighter, regardless of what his record looked like, he was just a fearless dude who got in there with anybody, and a very talented one at that too, especially early in his career. He was just one of the bigger personalities of the sport in general, not just of like the past 50 years or whatever, but just one of the all-time personalities. If you met him, you never forgot meeting him, and a genuinely really happy-go-lucky, good guy that you just wanted to be around his presence because he made everyone around him feel good. I loved watching him, and I loved watching him fight growing up, and I absolutely was blessed to have known him at the Hall of Fame, and he was one of my favorite people that I got to hang with early on when I used to go there. You know, I was a fucking punk 16, 17-year-old kid, and he was just like a larger than life presence because he treated himself like that. You know what I mean? Like you in the early days of the Hall of Fame, when I would go there, there was always like a select group of fighters who kind of made the same trek every year. Like you were always guaranteed to see Aaron Pryor, chances are you would see Arguello, Leon Spinks, Jose Torres, Lamada, Carmen Basilio, stuff like that. And Bramble was one of those guys too. Bramble was there every year. And just because he was younger, he was just more accessible and just more cool and with it. He always ran the 5K race that they would do, and he always would end up winning it too by like a substantial margin because he was still an active fighter while he was going to the hall. Even the last year I went when I graduated in 2003, I think his last fight was like soon after that. So he was always staying in shape and he would always, extend the virtues of eating clean and like clean living and, staying in shape and all that other shit. But it was just his fun ass personality. He was always the first one on the dance floor at Graziano's, and I would like follow him and just follow him around like a lost puppy because like he was just cool to be around. And he would never be like, "Yo, get out of my way, kid," or scram or nothing like that. He liked me. He would just let me hang around. Me and my best friend would just kind of hang on his side, and we would hang at the bar when we were way underage, and he would just let us hang with him. And I'd see him there like in the women of Canastota all loved him, and he was just a great personality. You know what I mean? But um. I'm sharing my personal memories about him. Like he just one of those guys that like, he had that famous Ring magazine with the snake around and all that. Just one of those guys that like you will know. I don't know if you ever had a chance to meet him, but like the first time you saw him, you had an impression. He left an impression with you.
I no, I never met him, but I definitely knew about him. I think that throughout his career, and especially in the '80s when he was, in his prime, or in the prime of as far as his notoriety and whatnot, he was probably known more as kind of an enigma, somebody that was kind of strange, eccentric. Sometimes would talk like in riddles, and just say things that were not inappropriate, but just like he would talk in a way where he like not really give you a straight answer type of shit, or kind of give you like a philosophical type of answer, rather than like, who are you fighting next or something like that, and be like, well, I'm fighting so and so, I want to fight so and so. You'd be like, well, it really depends on how the winds are blowing, and some shit, and they'd be like, huh? He had a dog named Snake, a snake named Dog.
Yep.
He used to carry his snake around. I think he had a couple snakes, but he used to carry one of his snakes around during promotional events and stuff like that. And of course, I'm not afraid of snakes, but I know a lot of people are really afraid of snakes. So that's the type of shit. A lot of like grown men too, are, like
Mhm.
super afraid of snakes. So it's the kind of shit where Jake the Snake, bro. Like motherfuckers would literally be like petrified of the goddamn snake. And like you said, also he was always in fantastic shape. And he was also one of those fighters where you look at his record, you can't be one of those box rec warriors with this guy. It doesn't make sense. You go down his record and it doesn't compute. He's it doesn't tell the full story of who he was. Even his very first loss involved a fighter that we talked about a couple of years ago on a show, on one of my favorite shows that we did about the Fighting Fletcher family from Philadelphia. A lot of fucking F's in that goddamn sentence. But that being said, he wound up Anthony Fletcher, one of the perhaps the most talented of the Fletchers, and perhaps the best fighter of the family, wound up fighting very close with Livingstone Bramble, and wound up, I think, winning like either a split decision or majority decision early on in his career. That was his one loss coming into the first Mancini fight. I mean, and he fought a literal who's who, from 135 to 140, 147 pounds for about, almost 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, even before he became champion, you make a good point with the Fletcher fight because Fletcher was a hell of a fighter before, his career and life went into an absolute tailspin. But look at it before then. Kenny Bang Bang Bogner was a guy who was on the cusp of fighting Ray Mancini for the lightweight championship on a number of occasions and was a top contender for a number of years. Jerome Artis was a guy that, a top name who fought a number of guys throughout. And this is like early on in his development. If you look at a guy today who's like building up, they're not gonna be fighting names like this on the come up like that. You know what I mean? James Bubba Buscemi,
I was about to say
um,
Baba Bushem, yeah.
who fought Alexis Arguello for the championship and was an overall very good fighter. Like these are really good guys. Gaten Hart, who definitely passed it by 83, but still had been around forever at that point. Had fought who's who, had got knocked out by Aaron Pryor in a junior 1980 title fight. Like these are all really good names. And then Raphael Williams is another guy who, if you know boxing, you would know that he fought a who's who throughout the 80s and especially the 90s. But in the mid 80s, early to mid 80s, he was an undefeated prospect on the way up that was looked upon as like, a future potential champion before he fought guys like Pernell Whitaker and Bramble and such. And that all led to his first fight with Ray Mancini. And at this point, Mancini was we've talked like huge, absolutely probably the biggest name in boxing outside of like the heavyweight champions or say Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler. You know what I mean? Like just a box office name because, well, he brought the type of that he good looking movie star, good looks, great personality. The story he had, the backstory with his dad, winning the lightweight championship for Lenny.
Holding the hopes and dreams of an entire town that had been totally fucked up and ravaged by,
Yes.
losing, et cetera, blah, 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 blah on the Rust Belt and, holding them on his shoulders and everybody loves him and the whole thing.
Not only that, just me an excellent all-around fun fighter to watch. He made for good fights. You were not going to find Ray Mancini in a boring fight because he couldn't let himself
100%.
allow to be in it. You knew you were going to get in there. He was going to take punches. He was going to give them back, and he was probably going to succeed. He was going to be bloody, and everyone was going to celebrate and be happy. Um, Bramble before the fight, like you said, he could be a little eccentric. This was like the first time his eccentricities were really coming out into the open like this because. Before the fight, Bramble, who was he was a Rastafari, obviously, right? That's and other things. He came in and he brought in a personal witch doctor for the fight, which ended up being his high school basketball coach,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
is
just playing
hysterical.
funky mind games.
Yeah, and he called them Doctor Do or Doctor Zoo, some shit on him, and he
Yeah, I was Dr. Do, yeah.
Doctor Do, yeah. It was a high school basketball coach, which is hysterical. The guy came in full garb and this whole thing and like, chanting and like throwing potions on Mancini and all this shit, which I think actually spooked Mancini a little bit. Not gonna lie, because they were
You get
bringing
that
in.
East Coast Italian Roman Catholic, bro. You start talking about witch doctor shit, you might make him uncomfortable.
Well, he also had a what's that shit you put pins in? A
Oh
voodoo
yeah,
doll.
voodoo doll, yeah, yeah.
He had a voodoo doll made of Mancini that resembled Mancini. And he was like pushing stuff in its eyes. He was like, "You feel that, Ray? You feel that?" And I'm pretty sure, which is a little on the dirty side, he was going in and talking stuff about Dooku Kim, Mancini famously killing him in a fight. So mind games up the ass with that. Plus, combine all of that, it's 1984. Mancini has gone through some fucking wars since he had been champion and was getting a little worn out, And Bramble was in his absolute prime at this point, young, hungry, and it was just recipe for an upset. Bramble it was an exciting fight and a good one, but one that Bramble was in control of the whole time before he eventually stopped him. And it was known as an upset because, again, Mancini was a huge, huge star at that point. So he beats Mancini again in a very close fight in a rematch, and a fight that notable because that's the first fight that CompuBox ever tracked for anything. That was their first card they did was the Bramble Mancini rematch, and then he fights Tyrone Crawley, who was another top contender of the lightweight during that era. And what makes that fight interesting, and I think I mentioned this on another show when we were talking about like crazy personalities, and Bramble got brought up, is that before the fight, Bramble found out that Crawley was from Philly and had police officers in his family. I mean, there was a lot of police in his family. He had a police family. And so when Bramble found that out, he dedicated the fight to Move. And Move was the group. You probably can explain them better than I could.
Was I can't remember what the acronym. I'd have to look it up what the acronym stands for, but it was basically like a community like defense type of, like an anti-police, under I'm not going to get into that.
It
Understandably,
was it was a def- it was a group. It was a group that
especially in this
yeah,
situation, because a lot of the urban environments in the, a lot of the big cities and urban environments in the late 70s and early 80s, police were continuing to be militarized and, fucking racist as shit. So they had some places pop up community in like, groups and stuff like that to basically not to battle the police, but to basically counteract the bad that the police were doing.
sure. And I want to say the story was that Move got their headquarters firebombed by the police and just
Yeah,
overall.
Philadelphia was its own thing, but yeah.
Yeah, they, shoot out. It was a nasty situation that
Yeah.
unfolded. So Bramble found out that Crowley was related to cops and he's from Philly, so he dedicated the fight to move. More mind games. But he ends up stopping Crowley.
Yeah,
And
it's like Floyd Mayweather dedicating his shit, against Corrales to, all the
yeah, yeah,
battered women out the way, right? And you're like,
exactly. Yeah. And but unfortunately for Bramble, this is where his career goes into a tailspin, is because he fights Edwin Rosario after this. And we've said this before, that this is one of the most coldest and conclusive beatdowns ever recorded in boxing history, especially in modern boxing, because it only lasts 2 rounds, but it's just brutal in its
yeah,
efficiency
he
what
really
Rosario
just
does.
overpowered him and just knocked his ass down. Like,
Yeah.
get down there, type of shit.
And it was awful, and it's like to see that. I mean, he just got the life beat out of him basically. Like this whole. And it's very very rare for only 2 rounds in a fight to like take the prime out of somebody and just kind of like put them on the down end. But that happened to Bramble. Like he was never the same after that fight. Rosario beat him so conclusively that like his career never recovered. His career as a top fighter was over that night. And if you watch it too, like you said, when he goes down, he's so beaten. He's just on all fours and he can't move. He's just slowly shaking his head because he's just throttled. You know, in that last combination, Rosario hit him, boom, boom, and I think it was like a right hand just pop, and
Yep.
then Bramble just dropped on all fours and just moved. He couldn't move. He was out, and his career never recovered. But like you said, he fought a who's who of anyone after that. Everybody after that. Won a few times, lost the majority of the times whenever he stepped up, but always remained popular because one, like we said, he was always in fantastic shape. Sometimes he would get stopped, but very rarely would he ever get like blown out. I don't think that ever really happened to him. And he was just serviceable. You know what I mean? His personality was good. He was still likable, and everybody, you just knew you were going to be in for a fight with him. And like one of his more notable ones that got him that type of thing was when he fought well, where is it over here? In 1991, he fought a young, still I want to say a teenager, maybe he was 20 years old at that point, Obakar, who was really popular in the Detroit area. He was 20 and 0. It was 1991. Bramble hadn't been champion for over 5 years at this point and, definitely had mixed results. And Carr was being featured frequently on USA Tuesday Night Fights. And so at the popularity of him was that they had a phone in where you could this is the first and only time I think they've ever pulled this off, is that they had a phone in where you could vote for whoever Carr's next opponent would be. And Bramble was one of the picks, and he won by overwhelming vote, like telephone vote. Everyone voted for Bramble. So then fight was made, and Bramble almost upset the apple cart. He dropped Carr early on, twice in the first round. Generally, had his head on his chest and just beat him up and like roughed him up. One of those fights that you need to go through as a prospect if you're going to go through anything. And that only enhanced like Bramble's image at that point in terms of being a serviceable guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no question, dude. He was you look at his record before then too, and you can definitely see the difference of, before and after without question too. Excuse me. And I mean, it's understandable because Rosario was a terrible puncher, just a guy you did not want to stand in front of and get hit like that. But he usually didn't ruin careers quite like that. It was just that you see Bramble go from top notch and kind of top flight to, more of an opponent that fighters are looking to get over on and build their name off of. Everyone from Kostya to, Buddy McGirt, who's kind of like in the midst of his career there. Shannon Taylor later. Oh God, Jesus. Shannon Taylor, Charles the
Jeffrey
Natural.
Russo. Ugh.
Yeah, that was when it started getting critical. But even Rafael Ruelas, dude, Rafael Ruelas in '96, still a very very good fighter, but just he's so far. Bramble's so far past it by this point that if Jeffrey Resto is putting him to bed, Jesus Christ, man.
There's actually a funny story because the McGirt Bramble fight was on the undercard of Pernell Whitaker Santos Cardona. And that was to build to the rematch to Whitaker McGirt too, which eventually did happen. But that was for I believe that was Buddy McGirt's first fight back after the Whitaker fight, and it was on HBO. But there's a funny little story afterwards that Bramble, kind of beat up because he lost every round. He got outboxed and all that. But after the fight, Bramble's young son who was like there's photos of them together, and that kid was like a spitting image of his dad from the same hairstyle and everything. And he runs up to him and he's like, "Dad, Dad," he was like, "Why'd you let that man beat you up like that?" Blah blah blah. And Bramble was like, "Son, what should I have done different? Whatever." And he's like, Bramble's kid was like, "You should have been like this," and he was running around in circles, like throwing a bunch of punches, and you could have done this, and you could have done this, and blah 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 blah. And and Bramble said like he grabbed his kid and like kind of held him close. He was like, "My son, you gotta understand he hits harder than you," or something like that. Like, you know. Well, he just, one of those guys that like you needed a person like that. You needed a personality like that, and that's the only type of personality you find is in the sport of boxing. And anyone that met him just loved him. Like if you got a chance to meet him at the Hall of Fame, you instantly remembered that and always kind of kept that close to you. Kind of like when you met Leon. These guys weren't going to get inducted into the Hall of Fame, but they were former champions who made their mark on the sport and had memorable nights and historic nights at that will always be remembered from generations on long after we're gone when people be reading about them in history books. So I'm glad that he was still able to get that recognition that whenever he would go there and like people would just be drawn to him. And like the Graziano stuff was the absolute best too, because like there was almost like an unwritten rule at Graziano's at night, at least, where people would like put away the gloves and other artifacts and stuff, and you're not going for autographs or photos or well, I mean photos were taken, but it was like candid photos of people having fun. It wasn't, you know what I mean? Like, hey, can we do the fist thing and all kind of shit like that? Like it was just everybody was just there to have a good ass time that night because they've been signing all day. They've done different, ringside lectures and this and that and blah 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 blah. Now it's time we can get down, we can party, we're gonna have fun, and that's what we all did. Everyone just had a fucking fun ass time and just let loose. And that's actually the best time to have fun with the fighters because they're not even all uptight and trying to be like, well, I got to go to this next thing or anything like that. They're just like, yo, you want to buy me a drink? Sure, what up? Let's hang out. Cool. Everyone was just cool. And Bramble was really the life of the party back then. He was always, like I said, the first one on the dance floor cutting a fucking rug. My man had some moves. He had a two-step and he was doing this and he was bopping and he would always grab one of them local counter soda townies on the side, just grab one of them and start dancing with her. And she's happy because she's having a former world
Yeah, because
champion.
they're getting the fucking week of their life. The
Yeah,
other 51 weeks, they're fucking working at the corner store at the mill or like
I'm serious.
churning butter or some shit.
There is
And then
absolutely nothing going on in Canada, so they're really
then
waiting, bro.
fucking Livingston Bramble waltzes into their lives for a week and they're fucking forever changed.
Seriously, and there's, I sent you the photo of me and Bramble and my best friend with him. It was just like that was our boy, bro. Like, and it's sad too because, like you said at the beginning of the show, we're aging, and all these guys that I used to see at the Hall of Fame every year are now gone. It's like a whole different generation now thinking back on it because the guys I would see and frequent and hang out with and talk and take photos with and schmooze with like Whitaker and Leon and Aaron Pryor, Matthew Saad Muhammad, um, Livingston Bramble now, and just other guys I would just see every year, even if I didn't really know them like that, like Jose Torres, Carlos Ortiz, Jimmy Ellis, they're all gone. Like all these guys are gone, and Alexis Arguello, like all of them, it's crazy to think about. Like these were people you would see it would almost be like a family reunion seeing them every year. Does that make sense? Because you didn't see them there, like you said, 51 weeks out of the year, but for one weekend, we all kind of got together and just hang out.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's time fucking moves on and there's nothing we can fucking do about it. And it sucks now, especially when it concerns the Boxing Hall of Fame, because the facility hasn't been updated in forever, at least not in a meaningful way. They don't really seem particularly interested in really reaching out to former champions and living legends that are around because so few actually show up now. It's
Mhm.
run by a bunch of motherfucking cops. So already you can kind of count me out. And I mean, bro, there's probably some police officer who's like a fan of the show listening right now. I don't care. I don't care. That being said, that sucks, dude. I wish I wish we did not have to do tribute shows. I mean, we don't have to, but look, there're gonna be a bunch of stupid ass Stanleys running around giving their own obituaries and tributes and stuff like that who don't know shit. And we're not trying to say that we were great friends with these people or know more than everybody. I'm just trying to say that I want to recognize them in a way that's meaningful in a way that's acknowledging what they accomplished in the ring and what's acknowledging that they were, human beings and shit like that. To me, that's important. So I wish we didn't have to do this kind of show, and it makes me sad. But hopefully, we did all right in terms of remembering these people.
Absolutely, and I think we did. It's a great overview of their careers and just talking about them in general. And it's like that's the best. It's the only thing you can do. If there's going to be 1,000 obituaries out there and 1,000 like write-ups to just be like, oh yeah, it happened, and blah blah blah. And how many people are going to actually talk about Livingstone Bramble? We're probably the only ones
Did
who are like,
anybody write that? Did anybody write that he's dead? Like, did anybody say it happened? It happened.
oh no, no, no,
Jesus, I
absolutely.
was about to say, bro, if you're quoting somebody, point me in their direction because I'm
Jesus,
about to go get righteous.
bro, I didn't even think about that. I was just like,
Oh God.
thinking in terms of like being it. People are just talking about like their favorite
I
memories. I
thought
didn't
I
even.
thought for a second that's what you're saying, and I was like, oh
Oh
my God, is
no,
that
I didn't
somebody
even
I
put that
know?
thought in my head. But oh my God, imagine if someone did
What
that.
if
I
somebody
might.
did? I mean, that's objectively kind of funny, but I'd still be like, oh my God, that's awful. What the fuck?
Wow, that's insane.
I don't know why that's what popped into my head, but it was. I don't know, Aris. I don't know.
It's okay, man. Well, don't worry about it. I mean, you didn't do it, so like it's all right. You just
All
thought
right,
of it.
we're okay. Yeah, I didn't post that or anything. We're okay. All right, we're all right.
Look,
Jesus.
no, it's like you said, man. Such is life. These things are gonna go on eventually, depending on how long we live. We're just gonna see more of our favorites, eventually pass on too. And that's what happens in sports. That's what happens in family and everything else. But like in boxing, sometimes we feel like these people become more than just fighters, like especially if we get to meet them. And for whatever reason, boxing seems like the type of sport where we get more access to fighters sometimes than other sports do. And just like that one-on-one time, you know what I mean? Like where, because a lot of those guys don't have the same type of, you know, uh, um, celebrity status of say a Michael Jordan or whoever the fuck a popular football quarterback would be or something like that. You know what I mean? Like they don't have that type of like thing. And even the people that don't have that type of status, but like are still in the NBA and all that, you can't just get next to some people like that. You know what I mean? Like you got
Exactly. Yeah,
somebody.
totally.
And boxing, we're just able to. A guy like Bramble, you can become friends with him. You just see him every year. You just talk to him. George, by all counts, even if you didn't knew, he didn't know you from a can of paint, if you needed a quote from him, he had you. And he would talk to you and be in depth and wouldn't just blow you off. He'd be like, oh yeah, this is it. I gotta go. Like he'd be like, what do you need? You know? So that's what I mean. It feels like we get like family, become family with these people, and that's what makes it hurt more.
To paraphrase Linda Ronstadt, I don't know much, but I know that Don King will be giving quotes about our deaths. That when we
Probably.
die, Don King, they'll be interviewing him, and Don King will say, "Fuck those guys." He'll still be alive. He'll
You
still
didn't
be
get my
alive.
jacket. You didn't get my jacket.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He'll say, "You didn't get any of my shirts, Eris. The
Yeah, you
fuck."
didn't get that jacket.
He's gonna fucking direct one at me and say, "I got stacks of magazines, you dead bitch."
Jesus. On that note,
Yep,
perfect.
I'm a lunatic.
Oh
I
no,
know.
no, no, that's hilarious. But no, I mean, it's kind of insane to think that like guys like Bob Arum and Don King are now in their mid 80s, mid 90s, or approaching in on that, and everyone else is just dropping around them.
Well, and it probably goes to show, and if you need any more fucking, argument that getting a hit in the head is not good for you and will end your life early, is perhaps that the dudes who are making money off of that happening are still alive.
Yeah.
Wild, crazy. All right, no, we can't do that. We got to end on a good note. Rest in peace, George Foreman and Livingston Bramble, aka Ras-I Alujah Bramble. It was I appreciate it, man. I really do appreciate you because I know it was like not easy. You know what I mean? You got to kind of scrape the halls of your memory to for some of this stuff, and not all of it's pretty. Sometimes the nostalgia makes you feel a little sad, but we just want to remember these dudes.
We do what we can.
I appreciate it, bro. Everybody who listened in, thanks so much for listening in. And go ahead and click subscribe on the podcast, leave us a rating, those kinds of things. And on YouTube, same. Subscribe, comment, rating, if that's a thing. I don't know. But go on to social media, look for the Knuckles and Gloves podcast, look for us individually. There'll be things on the screen for that. And thank you so much, Eris. We'll talk soon, bro.
Later.
Later, everybody.